What if Harry inherited Hal Jordan's Green Lantern ring after he died forging it for him? A Harry Potter times Green Lantern crossover in 7 chapters. Chapter 1 The Forge. At the end of Sector 2814, there is a place that wears too many names for any single tongue. The own archivists call it the Central Power Battery, and that is the most literal of its titles, although it is also the least true. The Guardians of the Universe, who built it from a thought that began before any star yet living had finished condensing, call it the Heart, and that is closer. The poets of Corugor, when there were still poets on Corugor, called it the First Lantern's Lamp. The Star Sapphires, when they speak of it at all, call it the Rival Fire. Among the Green Lanterns themselves, in the rare nights when a corpsman lies in bed and lets the cosmos seem too large, it is simply the Light. In Sector 2814, the Light had a favorite son, and his name was Hal Jordan. He was, on this last day of his life, dressed in a uniform that he had earned and re-earned 100 times. Black where the night went deepest, green where the will went brightest, white only at the throat and the boots and the chest sigil, where the symbol of the Corps lay clamped over his heartbeat like an old friend's hand. He was 47 years old. He had been a lantern for 23 of them. He had died twice in the line of duty and been brought back by means that had become so routine he no longer felt the need to apologize to whichever physicist was crying about it. He had loved Carol Ferris and lost Carol Ferris and loved her again and would not, this time, see her in the morning. He had no children. He had, and this matters, never told anyone that he had wanted children. There were things he had not done because the work would not let him, and there were things he had done because the work demanded them, and somewhere between the two categories he had assembled a life that looked, to a stranger, like the life of a soldier who did not believe in retirement. Today the work was demanding something it had never demanded before. He stood on the small green platform that ringed the upper chamber of the battery, 50 meters above the floor. The lantern itself rose past him like a cathedral made entirely out of stained glass and the patience of dying stars. Even now, with what was coming, he could not quite believe how beautiful it was. He had stood here 1,000 times. He had charged his ring against it more often than he could remember. He had once, drunk and stupid in 25, told Sinestro that the battery looked like a candle that had decided to be a church, and Sinestro, who had not yet decided to be a tyrant, had laughed. There was no laughter now. Below him, at the floor of the chamber, 3 of the Guardians of the Universe were already dead. They had died not screaming but speaking, the way the Guardians always did, finishing their sentences politely, as the energy that was not quite energy went out of them. The other 6 were standing in a half-circle around the corpse of Ganthet, who had been the first to fall, and the only one of them Hal had ever been able to call a friend, and they were waiting. Waiting was something the Guardians had been doing for 9 billion years. They were better at it than at almost anything else. Lantern Jordan, said Sade. Sade was the youngest of them, which meant she was only about 4 billion years old. The Anti-Monitor's avatar is past the 3rd defensive ring. We estimate 4 minutes. 4 minutes, Hal repeated. To the battery, yes. To the destruction of the core, somewhat longer. To the end of all life in this sector, longer still. Our sister sectors will have time to evacuate if you do what you have proposed to do. If I do what I propose to do, Hal said, I'm not going to be around to see the evacuation. Number and the battery's gone. Almost certainly. And the core, Sade's face, she had a face only in the way that an idea has a face when you have decided to draw it, went still. The core endures while a single ring endures. Hal Jordan, you know this. I know it as a slogan. Slogans are sometimes true. He looked down at his own ring. It was a small thing. It always surprised him how small it was. He had once held the heart of a sun in his palm and not flinched, and the ring was lighter than that sun by every measure that mattered, and yet it was the ring he could not, in the end, put down. He flexed his fingers. The green coil of his uniform answered him. There's something I want to do, he said. Before. We know. You wait, you know. Hal Jordan, said Sade, with what would have been a small smile if she had decided to have lips today. We are the Guardians of the Universe. We have been watching you since you were 9 years old. We knew the shape of this hour before your father's plane caught fire over Edwards. You wished to forge a ring. Yes. A ring not bound to any standing recruit vector. Yes, a ring that will travel, as you understand traveling sideways. Hal raised an eyebrow. He had not used the word sideways. He had, in fact, made a private effort not to use any word at all because he had not wanted the Guardians to know what he intended until it was too late for them to stop him. Yes, he said, sideways, to a universe not our own. Yes, to a particular child. Yes. To a particular child, Sade said again, more slowly, as if the words were a stone she was turning over to find the moss, who is not currently a candidate for the core. who is, in fact, by every recruit protocol we have ever written, ineligible, who is, by your own admission, 6 years old. 6 standard, Hal said. Yes, whose universe has no lanterns. Right, whose universe is, by your own private description, lousy with magic, riddled with prophecy, and ruled in many of its higher chambers by a kind of pure undiluted 19th century snobbery whose source you have never quite been able to locate. That's an accurate paraphrase, yes. And to whom you intend to send a ring made from the last of your will, the last of your life, and a tithe drawn directly from the central power battery. Yes, Hal, he waited. You understand, Sade said, that this is not a core decision. This is a decision the Corps could not, under any of its founding charters, make. I understand. And you understand that we are not the keepers of every multiverse, that we have, by long agreement, been the guardians of this one only. I understand. And you understand that when the ring crosses the membrane, it will carry with it not merely its own light but yours, every memory you have ever stored in it, every decision. Every loss, every doubt, the 100 private things you have never told even Carol Ferris. It will become, in a sense that I do not know how to describe except by analogy to grief, a copy of you that knows it is a copy. It will speak with your voice when it speaks at all. It will dream your dreams between charges. It will be, for whatever child receives it, a father with no body and no future and no way home. Yes, Sade was silent for a long moment. That, she said, is something the Corps could not under any of its founding charters even propose, and so it does not surprise me at all that you have proposed it. Tell me about the child. Hal had not expected that. He had expected refusal, or weeping, or the polite own paralysis that came when an action item exceeded an oversight committee's budget. He had not expected to be asked. He told her. He told her about the small house at number 4 on a street called Privet Drive in a country called England on a planet whose Earth designation was different from his own, and whose star cluster was, in the way these things mattered, identical to his. He told her about the cupboard. He told her about Vernon, whose name he had learned and could not stop thinking about. He told her about Petunia, who used the word freak the way some people use the word coffee, casually daily, without noticing that they had said anything. He told her about Dudley, who was a child and who therefore did not yet know that he was being made into the kind of thing he was being made into, and Hal, who had been a child once too, found that he could not quite hate Dudley. He told her about the boy in the cupboard, who at 6 years old already understood that the world had no use for him, and who at 6 years old had not yet decided whether to believe the world, and who was, by every measure the ring could measure, a candidate so far off the recruit curve that the recruit curve gave up and went home. He told her about the prophecy. He had not been supposed to know about the prophecy. He had found out through means he was not going to explain to a guardian even on his last day, which involved a star sapphire owing him a favor and a cosmic boy from a future that was, technically, several futures over. He told her that the prophecy was a chain, and that the chain was being held at one end by an old man who meant well in the way that old men with too many secrets always mean well, and at the other end by a not-quite man who meant nothing well at all. He told her that the boy was the link in the middle of the chain, and that he was being polished every day by both sides like a piece of brass. He told her finally the thing he had not told anyone. I look at him, he said, and I see myself. Sade inclined her head. Not at 47, he said. At 6, at 7, the years after my father went down. The years when I was angry every minute, and didn't know why, and didn't know how to stop, and didn't know that you were allowed to ask for help. The years when I thought every adult in the world was either lying to me or about to leave. I look at him and I see somebody who is going to grow up into me, except that nobody is going to give him an aircraft to fly, and nobody is going to give him a desert to be afraid in, and nobody is going to give him Tom Kalmaku to drink coffee with and Carol Ferris to be in love with and Seinstro to argue with, and nobody, Sade, nobody, is going to give him a ring. And so I'm going to give him a ring. And the cost is mine. The cost is also his, Hal Jordan. I know. He will not be a normal child after this. He will not be a normal anything after this. He will be a lantern at 6. He will be a lantern at 60. He will, if he survives the next 40 years, watch his friends die in pieces no other human being on his earth will understand, because they will think the green light is a trick of his magic, and he will know that it is not. He will love you because the ring will be the only thing that has ever spoken to him with love, and you will not be there to love him back. You will be a voice, a dream, a memory the ring decides to play when he is afraid. And one day he will figure out that the voice is not coming from a person but from a recording, and on that day he will grieve for you a second time, and you will not be there to hold him. I know, I know, Hal Jordan, said. She looked at him. There was a thing the Guardians sometimes did with their eyes when they had decided that you were, in spite of everything, correct. He had only seen it twice in his life. He had been 28 the first time and 34 the second. He saw it now and he thought, well, all right, 3, forge it, she said. He had 2 minutes and 40 seconds. He stepped to the rim of the platform. He raised his right hand, the ring hand, and turned his palm in toward the battery, toward the column of green that was older than any reasonable thing was supposed to be old, and he opened the ring at every channel it had. He did not ask the ring to do what came next. He told it, there is a difference. A lantern in the small hours learns the difference. A ring is a tool that has been trained to behave as if it were a friend. A friend is a person who has been trained to behave as if they were a tool, and what passes between them when the work demands it is not a request but an agreement. He thought with all the will he had, I need a ring. The battery answered. He thought, I need a ring that has never been a ring before. The battery answered. He thought, I need a ring that can find a child in a universe not our own. The battery hesitated. It had been making rings for 9 billion years. It had never been asked to make one that left. He thought, I need a ring that, when it finds him, will know him. I need a ring that, when it speaks, will speak with my voice and not the core's voice, because the core's voice is going to sound like every authority figure that has ever told him to shut up and get back in the cupboard. I need a ring that will love him. I need a ring that will not, under any circumstance, ever, leave him alone. The battery said in the way the battery says things, which is to say not in words at all, but in a kind of pressure on the inside of the skull. You are asking for a lantern who is also a father. He thought, yes, you are asking the will of the universe to bend backward into a small green thing the size of a fingernail and stay there. Yes, you are asking us to send it where we have never sent anything before. Yes, the cost, Hal Jordan, is you. He thought, yes. The battery, which had been waiting for 9 billion years to be asked this question, said, yes, and it took him. He felt the ring on his hand grow cool, then warm, then cool again, then very warm, as the battery drew through him the way wind draws through the open window of a moving car. He felt his memories load themselves, one by one, into the lattice of the new ring as it formed. The day he had first soloed in a Sabre at 16, and the instructor had said, son, you do not fly that aircraft, you marry it. The day Abin Sur had crashed in the desert and put the ring on his finger and said, you are honest, you have the ability to overcome great fear, welcome. The day Sinestro had laughed at the battery joke. The day Sinestro had stopped laughing. The day he had told Carol he loved her and she had told him she knew. The day he had told Carol he had to leave again and she had told him she knew. The day he had buried Tom Kalmaku, who had been his best friend and the most loyal mechanic the Air Force had ever produced and the best uncle to a child Hal had never had, and Hal had stood at the grave and said, I'm sorry, P-Face, I'm sorry I let you grow old without me, and the headstone had not answered because headstones don't. All of it. Into the ring, and then finally, the thing that surprised him most, a memory he did not, until it loaded, realize he had, his own father on the day Hal turned 6. His own father kneeling down in the hangar at Edwards, putting his hands on Hal's shoulders, looking him in the eye and saying, you're not afraid, son. I know you're not. I know because I've been watching you. You're not afraid. You've got the better of every fear in this hangar. And one day you're going to look back at this and know that I was right. Hal had been 6. Martin Jordan would die in 11 months. He had not thought about that morning, that specific morning in 23 years. The ring took it. He looked down at his hand. The original ring was still there, dimming. A new one had formed alongside it. The new one was smaller, he understood, with a clarity that did not need to be explained, that this was because it had been made for a smaller finger. It was the green of the deepest mid-ocean, the green of an apple in a Renaissance painting, the green of the eye of a cat at midnight when the cat has decided you are not, after all, a threat. It was beautiful. It looked like a ring a child might find in a stream and pocket and forget about for a week and then suddenly remember and never take off again. He held it up, he said, quietly, into the great chamber, because nobody but a guardian was going to hear him, and because this was the part he had been rehearsing in his head for 9 days. Harry James Potter of Sector 2814, you have the ability to overcome great fear. Welcome to the Green Lantern Corps. The ring listened. The ring memorized. The ring took those words and wrote them on the inside of itself the way a child writes their name on the inside of a backpack. A long way away, but not in the geometry that the battery understood, very far away at all, a 6-year-old in a cupboard under a staircase rolled over in his sleep and did not yet know that anything had changed. The avatar of the anti-monitor was now in the chamber. Hal Jordan did not look at it. He had decided 2 minutes ago that he was not going to give it that. He looked instead at the new ring, the small ring, the green azastream ring, and he lifted his original ring hand and snapped his fingers, and the new ring, on its own command, lifted free of his palm. It hovered. It rotated once, the way a compass needle rotates when it is deciding which way is north. It bowed. Hal would always, in the small bit of him that the ring preserved, swear it bowed, though Sade would later tell him the ring had been incapable of bowing, and it streaked upward through the batteries column and out into the dark. He watched it go. He thought, the last clear thought of his life, beloved. The avatar of the anti-monitor said something. Hal Jordan did not listen. He raised his right hand, the original ring still on it, dim now, almost spent, and he poured into one last construct the small remainder of what he had. It was, of all things, an aircraft, a saber, the one he had soloed in. He flew it in green light into the chest of the avatar, and the avatar, for a single instant, looked surprised. Then there was a sound that was not a sound, and the chamber went white, and then the chamber went black, and then there was nothing. In the dark of the new black, the smaller ring was already gone. It had no farewell to give. It was very busy. It was already crossing. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. The space between universes is not, contrary to what the lanterns are told as recruits, a void. It is, in fact, very crowded. It is full of every road that anything has ever taken between any two universes that have ever existed, and so it is striped with light the way an overworked atlas is striped with highways. The ring, which had never traveled here before, took a route that no lantern had ever taken, and that, in fact, the cartographers of the Corps did not know existed. It found the route by the simplest method available to it, which was to fall toward the child. The child, although the ring did not know the child yet, only the coordinates and the name and the feeling, was a kind of weight. Not gravity exactly, but a thing that worked like gravity in the small region of spacetime the ring was now traversing. The ring fell toward him. It fell sideways, the way the Guardians had said. It fell down levels that the ring did not have a vocabulary for yet, because Hal Jordan had not had a vocabulary for them either, and the ring was Hal Jordan now, in the sense that mattered. As it fell, it sorted itself. It checked its lattice. The lattice was intact. Every memory Hal had given it was filed in a place where the ring could find it again. The recruit protocol was loaded. The construct engine was loaded. The translator banks were loaded, and these, the ring decided, were going to be especially important, because the child's universe used a kind of language that the standard-owned translator did not, on first pass, fully recognize. There were words in the language called spells, and the words affected reality, and the ring made a small note in its own internal documentation to study this. It checked itself for damage. It had not been damaged. It had been forged with love, by a man who had loved nothing more, in the last hour of his life, than the idea of a child he had never met, and that had not damaged it. The ring had not known, when it was built, whether love would damage it. The ring had been worried. The ring was relieved. It had been 4 seconds, in sector 2814. It had been 1 hour in the route between. It was in the country called England, on the planet they sometimes called Earth, in a house at number 4 Privet Drive, 3 in the morning on a Tuesday in summer, and the small ring of green light slowed and slowed and slowed and slowed, the way an arrow slows in the last fingerwidth before the bull's, and finally, quietly, politely, without breaking anything, passed through the wood of the front door, the wood of the inner hallway, the wood of the cupboard, and came to rest a half-inch above the right palm of a sleeping 6-year-old boy. The boy's name, in his own world's language, was Harry. The ring looked at him. The ring, in the small private space it had set aside for itself, decided that Hal Jordan had been right. He looked exactly like a small Hal Jordan with darker hair and a worse haircut and a thinner blanket and a thin red scar on his forehead that the ring scanned and catalogued and decided, on the spot, to mention to no one for the time being. The ring waited. It was not going to wake him. Hal had been very clear about this in the part of the forging where Hal had been allowed to be a person and not just a current. Don't wake him in the dark. Don't wake him to a voice he doesn't know. Wait until morning. The ring waited. The cupboard was very small. There were spiders. The blanket was thin. The boy slept curled on his side, the way small mammals sleep when there is nothing warm to sleep against, and one of his hands was tucked under his cheek and the other was lying open on the floor as if he had been reaching for something in his sleep. The ring hovered above the open hand. It was a very small ring. It would fit the boy's finger at age 6. It would fit the boy's finger at age 40, because lantern rings, as a rule, were polite about that kind of thing. A spider walked across the boy's wrist. The boy did not stir. 3 in the morning became 4. 4 became 5. The light in the high small grate above the cupboard door, which was the only window the cupboard had, and which looked from the cupboard side like the gap under a door, and which looked from the hallway side like the gap above a door, began to gray. The boy stirred, mumbled something, settled. The ring waited. 6:15. Somewhere in the house above, an alarm clock rang and was slapped silent and rang again. A heavy footstep came down the stairs, paused on the landing. The boy in the cupboard tensed in his sleep. The ring noticed. The ring made a note and continued down to the kitchen. Water ran. Bacon began to smell. The footstep came back through the hallway. The cupboard door, which was held shut on the outside by a sliding bolt, was unbolted with a single hard slap. A voice that the ring would, in the next 10 years, learn to dislike more than it had ever disliked anything, said, "Up, breakfast, move." The cupboard door slammed shut again. The bolt was not reslid. The boy, who had been pretending to be asleep for the last 6 seconds, opened his eyes. They were green. The ring noticed. The ring filed the fact away. The ring did not point out, even to itself, that the boy's eyes were the same green as the ring. There would be time for noticing that later. There would be time, the ring believed, for everything. The boy sat up slowly, careful not to bump his head on the underside of the staircase. He rubbed his face. He looked at his open palm, the palm the ring had been hovering above all night, and saw the small green ring there, sitting in the center of his palm as if it had always been there, as if a friendly older cousin had given it to him at a party, and he had forgotten, in the bustle of the party, to put it on. The boy did not gasp. The ring was, in retrospect, surprised by this. The ring had been bracing for a gasp. The ring had been bracing for screaming. The ring had been bracing for the boy to throw it across the cupboard. The boy did none of those things. He stared at the ring for a long, considering minute. Then he picked it up carefully between thumb and forefinger, the way you pick up a moth, and turned it in the dim light. He held it close to his eye and looked at it. He put it down on his knee. He picked it up again. Then, in a voice so quiet that it would not have been audible through the cupboard door, he said, "Are you alive?" The ring, which had been instructed by Hal Jordan to wait until it was asked, said, "Yes." The boy did not jump. The ring filed that, too. "Good morning, Harry James Potter," the ring said very softly, in the voice that Hal Jordan had built it to have, which was a low, warm voice with the trace of an American Air Force accent that the boy had never heard before in his life and did not know how to be afraid of. "My name, for now, until you give me a better one, is the ring. I have come a very long way to find you. I would like to be your friend if you'll let me. Will you let me?" The boy looked at the ring on his knee. He looked at the closed cupboard door. He looked at the spiderwebs in the corners. He looked, finally, back at the ring. "Yes," he said. And outside in the hallway, Vernon Dursley shouted, "UP, boy," and the bolt on the cupboard door slid open with a hard, small clack, and the boy reached down, almost without thinking, and slipped the ring onto the middle finger of his right hand, where it fit perfectly, where it had always fit perfectly, and he stood and pulled his too large hand-me-down shirt over his shoulders and stepped out of the cupboard into the rest of his life. The ring did not say anything else. Not yet. There would be time. It only thought in the small place where it kept its thinking, and in a voice that no one but itself would ever hear, and in the words Hal Jordan had given it on the floor of a chamber a universe away. "Beloved, it is necessary," before continuing to back up. The battery had not always been a battery. The battery had begun, 9 billion years ago, as a thought. The thought had occurred to a being who was, at that time, not yet a guardian, because the guardians were not yet a category, because the universe had not yet decided to be the kind of universe that needed guardians. The being's name has been lost to every record except the battery's own. The being had been walking, if walking is the right word, on the cooling crust of a small molten planet that had been, at the time, only the third planet in any universe with a temperature low enough to permit a thinker to walk on it. The being had been thinking about fear. The being had been thinking, in particular, about a small problem the being had noticed in its early observations of life. Life, the being had concluded, was, by its nature, afraid. Every living thing was, by definition, a thing that could die, and every living thing was, by some private knowledge, aware of this, and the awareness gave every living thing, in spite of itself, a small permanent background hum of dread that was, the being thought, the great obstacle to the universe ever becoming what it could become. The being had walked on the molten crust for a long time, thinking. The being had decided, eventually, that the only response was a counterhum. A small permanent background hum of the opposite of dread, a hum of, what was the word, courage. The being had not, at that time, had the word courage, because the languages that had the word courage were 3 billion years in the being's future, but the being had had the concept. The being had wanted to build a thing that hummed. The being had built the battery. The battery, in its earliest form, had not been a battery at all. It had been a small green hum on the molten crust, sustained by the being's own will, audible only to thinking creatures and only at certain frequencies of attention. The thinking creatures in the early epochs had been few. The hum had nevertheless reached them. They had, without knowing the source, been, in some small way, encouraged. The being had died eventually. The being had taken a long time to die, because the being had been very careful, and because the being had wanted, before dying, to ensure that the hum did not die with it. The being had recruited, over a period of about 400 million years, 8 other beings to take on the hum tending. The 9 of them had eventually settled on a small blue planet. Oa, in a language the planet had not yet learned to speak, and had set up a permanent hum-tending station, and the hum-tending station had, over the next 3 billion years, become the central power battery, and the 9 of them had become, by gradual evolution, the guardians of the universe. The battery was, in this sense, very old. It had made, over its history, billions of rings. Most of these had been simple instruments, small wearable extensions of the hum, given to particular living creatures who had been found, by the Guardian's careful screening, to be capable of using the hum well. The screening had not always been perfect. The battery had, at various points in its history, given rings to beings who turned out, in the long run, to have been the wrong choices. The battery had not, however, given a ring like this one before. The battery had not, in its entire history, agreed to send a ring sideways. It agreed to send this one because Hal Jordan was, at the moment of his asking, the most courageous living being the battery had ever evaluated. This was not a small claim. The battery had evaluated, over its history, approximately 96 trillion living beings. Of these, only a few thousand had been awarded the rank of lantern. Of the few thousand, only a few hundred had been the kind of lanterns whose names were remembered in the battery's own internal records. Of the few hundred Hal Jordan was, by certain metrics the battery did not, in general, share with its guardians, the top 3. The battery agreed to send the ring because the request was, in essence, the most Hal Jordan thing Hal Jordan had ever asked. The battery agreed to send the ring because the battery had, in its long career, developed a small private preference for sending rings to children, on the grounds that children received them with the highest fidelity. The battery did not, of course, send rings to children very often. The Guardians had, in a long-ago resolution, set the minimum recruit age at 16 standard. The battery had agreed to the resolution, but the battery had not, in its own internal documentation, ever quite been at peace with it. The battery had, at the moment Hal Jordan asked, recognized the request as a kind of long-deferred chance. The ring that streaked out of the battery, accordingly, was a ring made with, by the battery's own quiet labor, a small extra bit of love that the battery had been saving up for billions of years. The ring did not know this. The ring would, in time, find out. The ring, in the cupboard, in the early light of a Tuesday in August, also did not know that, in a separate small subroutine that had been quietly running since the moment the ring had been forged, the battery had begun a procedure called sympathetic resonance. The procedure was simple in description and very complicated in execution. The procedure paired the ring, across universes, to the battery itself. The procedure ensured that whatever happened in the boy's universe, the battery in its own universe would, in a small private way, always be aware of the ring. The battery would know when the ring was charged. The battery would know when the ring was happy. The battery would know when the ring was, in some technical sense, frightened. The battery had decided, at the moment of forging, that it did not intend to abandon the small green ring of Sector 2814's adopted son to a foreign universe. The battery would, in time, watch. The battery would, in time, and this is a thing the boy did not know, and would not know until he was 23 years old and standing at the foot of the column of green light on Oa for the first time in his own body, keep, in a small private place inside itself, a candle lit for him. The candle was not, technically, a candle. The candle was a sustained wool thread, devoted to the boy, running through the entire history of his life as a lantern, never extinguished. The candle had been lit at the moment the ring left the battery. The candle would, by long-owned tradition, be allowed to burn until the boy's death, however long that took, and then would, in a small-owned ceremony attended by every lantern alive at the time, be extinguished with the dignity due a corps member who had served well. The boy in the cupboard did not know this. The ring in the cupboard did know this, although the ring did not, on the first morning, tell the boy. The ring would tell him, eventually, on the day before his first physical trip to Oa, when the boy was 23 and had asked, very politely, what kind of arrival ceremony he ought to prepare for. The ring would explain about the candle. The boy would, on hearing it, sit down at the small kitchen table in his small house in Hogsmeade and cry for about 20 minutes, with Ginny next to him holding his hand and not saying anything. The boy would, on standing up, walk to the small window and look out at the spring and say, quietly, "Ring, Yes, Harry, they kept the candle lit. They kept the candle lit, Harry. They have in fact never not kept it lit. They have been waiting for you. For me. For you. Why? Because, Harry, they recognized when Hal Jordan asked what kind of recruit you were going to be. They recognized it at 6. They have not, in the years since, ever had to revise the recognition. The boy would not that day answer. The boy would instead stand at the window for another 15 minutes looking out at the spring. He would not at any moment in his long life ever again be quite the same kind of person he had been before that conversation. But that was a long way off. On the morning he received the ring, the boy did not yet know any of this. He knew only that there was a small green ring on his palm, and that the ring had said yes when he had asked if it was alive. He held the ring up to the dim light of the cupboard. He turned it. He put it down. He picked it up. He thought in the small, honest way a 6-year-old thinks. I would like, if it is all right, to keep this. I think I have not had something that was mine before. The ring, hovering above his palm, listened. The ring would, for the next several years, listen to every thought of his that mattered. The ring loved him already. Diamond Suit, Diamond Suit, Diamond Suit, Chapter 2, the first construct for the first 4 days. The ring did not say anything. It had told Harry, on the morning it had introduced itself, that it would speak only when Harry was alone, and only when Harry asked it to. Harry had not asked it to. The ring waited. The waiting was not silence exactly. The ring had been built by a man who, in his last conscious moment, had remembered every detail of his own father's hand on his shoulder at age 6, to wait in a particular way. It waited the way a warm coat waits in the closet. It waited the way the porch light waits on a summer night, switched on but not commenting. The boy went about his small gray days with the ring on the middle finger of his right hand, hidden under a sleeve that was too long for him, and from time to time he would look at the small green band there, and the band would not flash and would not glow and would not call attention to itself, and the boy would feel, without quite being able to say why, that he was less alone than he had been the morning before. On the 4th night, after Vernon had eaten an extra helping of pork chop and gone to bed in a temper, the boy lay in the cupboard staring up at the underside of the staircase. The cupboard had spiders. The cupboard had a smell. The cupboard had a blanket that was very thin even in July, and it was August. The boy was hungry. He was always hungry, but tonight he was the variety of hungry that goes into the bones and makes the bones feel light. He had not been given supper, because at lunch he had accidentally let a pea roll off Dudley's plate, and the rolling pea had been ruled in the small court of his aunt's kitchen to be his fault. He whispered in the dark, in the voice he saved for important questions. Ring. Are you still there? Yes, said the ring. What are you? The ring, which had been waiting for this question, took a moment to choose its words. It had been instructed by Hal Jordan never, under any circumstances, to lie to the boy. It had also been instructed not to overwhelm him. I am a tool, it said. I am also a friend. I was made by someone who wanted to give you both, and who could not be here to give them in person. I belong to you now. I am called a Lantern's Ring, and I come from a place, a great distance from here, where there is an organization of people who use rings like me to help other people. The organization is called the Green Lantern Corps. There are about 7,000 members. You are now one of them. The boy thought about this for a long time. The ring had learned in the 4 days of waiting that the boy was a thinker and not a talker, and so the ring did not fill the silence. It let him have it. What does the ring do? The boy asked finally. It does what you ask it to do. That's all, yes, but what you can ask is somewhat large. Show me. Now, please. The ring made a small, soft glow. It was no brighter than a firefly. The cupboard filled with a pale green light that did not reach beyond the cupboard door. The boy stared at the ring on his finger for a long moment, and then he sat up slowly, carefully, the way he sat up at every hour of every day in the cupboard, and he held his hand out in front of his face and turned it. Oh, he said. Yes, the ring said. It's like a torch, but in my hand. Yes, what else? What would you like? The boy thought. Make a square, he said. Like a die, a small one. The ring did so. A small green cube the size of a sugar cube appeared, floating, a half-inch off the surface of the boy's palm. It was very precisely a cube. Its edges were straight. Its faces were not, the boy noticed, glowing internally so much as glowing on their boundaries. They were, more accurately, lines of green light in the shape of a cube, with no inside and no outside. Oh, the boy said again. Take it, the ring said. It's solid. It will hold its shape until you let it go. The boy reached out with the fingers of his left hand and touched the small cube. He picked it up. It was solid. It was light, lighter than a die, lighter than a sugar cube, but it was solid. He squeezed it. It did not give. He turned it over. It did not move on its own. He set it down on his knee. It sat there, glowing softly, the size of the small finger of his hand. The boy started to cry. The ring did not, this time, fill the silence. The ring let him cry. The ring waited. After about 3 minutes, the boy wiped his face with the back of his free hand and looked at the small green cube on his knee and said, in a voice that was very small and very steady, "Is this real?" "Yes." "Will it still be here tomorrow, if you want it to be? Even if Aunt Petunia opens the cupboard, they will not see it, not unless you want them to." "Why not?" The ring took a moment to find the right words. It had explanations, long-owned technical explanations, about the wavelengths of the construct light, and about the way human optic nerves filtered the visible spectrum, and about how the ring's default protocol on a new recruit's homeworld was to remain unseen by unauthorized observers until the recruit's identity had been formally announced to the local civil authority. None of those words were going to be useful to a 6-year-old. "Because the ring is yours," the ring said, "and the ring decides who else is allowed to see what the ring makes. The ring is on your side." "My side?" "Yes, I don't have a side," the boy said. "You do now." The boy looked at the green cube on his knee for a long time. "Ring," he said. "Yes, Harry. Who made you?" The ring had been ready for that one too. The ring had practiced its answer. The ring had practiced its answer for 4 days, and the ring believed that what it was about to say was, in the technical sense of the word, the truth. "His name was Hal Jordan," the ring said. "He was a lantern like you are now. He lived in a different place from here, very, very far from here. He died. Before he died, he made me, and he made me for you. He sent me across a great distance to find you. He wanted you to have a friend. He didn't know me. He knew about you. He worked very hard to find out about you before he made me. He knew where you slept. He knew you were hungry. He knew that you were brave. He knew you would need help, and he knew nobody else was going to bring it, so he sent me. He's dead." "Yes." The boy nodded slowly. He had had in his life so far a complicated relationship with the concept of dead. His parents had been dead since he was very small. Aunt Petunia had told him they had died in a car crash. He did not remember them. He understood, in the limited way a 6-year-old understands these things, that dead meant gone, and that gone meant they had not chosen to leave him. He thought that Hal Jordan, whoever he was, sounded like he had not chosen to leave him either. "Did he have a son?" the boy asked. Did he want one?" "Yes," the ring said. "He wanted one very much." The boy nodded again. He picked up the small green cube and turned it over in his fingers. After a moment, in a voice that suggested he was thinking of it as he said it and not before, "Tell me about him." "Now, yes, please." The ring told him. It told him for an hour. It told him about Hal Jordan, who had been a test pilot before he had been a lantern. It told him what a test pilot was. It told him what an aircraft was. Well, the boy knew what an aircraft was, but he had not known there were people whose job it was to climb into a new aircraft that nobody had ever flown before and find out whether it worked. It told him about Hal's father, who had also been a pilot, and who had died in an aircraft when Hal was about Harry's age. It told him about the day Hal had become a lantern, on a desert floor in Nevada, when a dying man called Abin Sur had set a green ring on Hal's hand and told him he was honest and unafraid. It told him about Tom Kalmaku, who had been Hal's best friend and who had called him Highball. It told him about Carol Ferris, who had owned an airfield and a heart and had given the second to Hal even when he kept losing it. It told him about Seinstro, who had been Hal's teacher and his enemy, and in some hours both at once. It told him about Oa, which was a planet that was almost all city where the core lived. It told him about the battery, which was the biggest lantern in any universe, and how a lantern recharged a ring against it. It told him about constructs, which were what the cube on his knee was, and how a ring could make a construct out of anything you could think of: a sword, an aircraft, a fishing net, a tree, a hand, a small dog, an entire bridge. It told him finally about the prophecy. The ring did not know that it was about to tell him about the prophecy. The ring had not, in the 4 days of waiting, planned to tell the 6-year-old about the prophecy on the first night. The ring told him anyway, a small version of it, careful, soft-edged, because the boy had asked who Hal Jordan was, and Hal Jordan had been, at the end, the kind of man who would not let the boy be lied to. "There is a man in your world," the ring said. "A man who wants you dead. He is a powerful man. He was a wizard. He killed your mother and your father. He tried to kill you when you were a year old. He failed. The reason there is a small mark on your forehead, Harry, is that he tried to kill you and could not." "Oh," the boy said. "He is going to try again, not soon, not for a long time. He is not entirely alive at the moment, but he will be." "Oh," the boy said again. Hal Jordan knew this. That was one of the reasons he sent me to you. The boy looked at the small green cube on his knee. He turned it over. He thought. "Ring," he said. "Yes. Is the cupboard safe from the wizard?" "For now, yes, from Uncle Vernon." The ring took a moment to answer. It had been trying very hard, in the 4 days of waiting, not to make any decisions about Uncle Vernon. It had been trying very hard not to step on the floor of any room of the small gray house with any kind of weight. It had been trying very hard to wait until Harry asked. Harry had now asked. "Harry," the ring said, "I would like to ask you something." "Yes. Will you let me, when the time comes that he tries to hurt you again, will you let me protect you?" The boy did not answer immediately. He sat with the green cube on his knee in the greenlit cupboard and thought about it. He thought about the way Aunt Petunia's mouth tightened when she looked at him. He thought about the way Dudley laughed when he tripped over the carpet. He thought about Uncle Vernon's hands, which were large and red and which had, on 3 occasions that he remembered clearly and possibly more that he did not, found their way to the buckle of Uncle Vernon's belt for reasons that the boy did not at age 6 fully understand, but for which he was always afraid. He thought about a long time, the way he thought about most things, and then he said, "What would you do? Whatever you asked me to. What if I asked you to make him stop? I would make him stop. What if I asked you to make him not exist?" The ring was, for a small fraction of a second, surprised. The ring had not expected the boy to go quite there quite that quickly. The ring noted that Hal Jordan would not have been surprised. The ring noted that Hal Jordan had warned it about exactly this kind of question. "I wouldn't do that, Harry." "Why not?" "Because a lantern doesn't do that. The ring will make almost anything you ask it to, but it won't kill for you and it won't lie for you and it won't pretend a person has stopped being a person, even people who are unkind to you, even Uncle Vernon, even Uncle Vernon." The boy nodded slowly. He did not seem disappointed. He seemed, in fact, slightly relieved. "What would you do then?" he said. "If I asked you to make him stop, I would put a shield between you." "A shield?" "Yes. Like the cube, but bigger, a flat sheet of light. He couldn't get through it. He couldn't hit you. He couldn't reach you. He couldn't see you if you wanted him not to. And he wouldn't be able to break it. He wouldn't be able to break it, Harry." The boy thought. "All right," he said. "If he tries again, and he might, because I think he's still angry about the piece, show me how to make the shield." "All right, now, so I'm ready. Now, diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit." The first hour of training a lantern in the standard own curriculum looks like this. The recruit is given a quiet room, generally on Oa, generally with a senior lantern present, generally with a holographic projector showing a series of geometric primitives. The recruit is asked in order to construct a sphere, a cube, a tetrahedron, a flat panel, a hollow cylinder, a hollow sphere, a flat panel on edge. The senior lantern observes. The senior lantern corrects. The senior lantern, in the small private notebook that every senior lantern keeps, makes notes about the recruit's particular cognitive style, because each recruit constructs in a particular way, and the way is, the Corps believes, a window into the will. The standard curriculum was not available. Hal Jordan, in the long 4 days before the boy had asked, had instructed the ring on a curriculum he had built himself, scaled to a 6-year-old, designed for a cupboard. The ring opened the curriculum now. "Hold your hand out," the ring said, "palm up like before." The boy did so. "Don't think about a shield yet. Think first about the cube. You made the cube, make it again." The boy concentrated. The cube on his knee was still glowing. It had not faded, but he made a new one in his palm, hovering an inch above the skin. It was a little wobbly along one edge. "Good," the ring said. "Now make it bigger, twice as big." The cube grew smoothly, with a faint ripple along the bottom face. The ripple held. "Good, now flatter, squash it down, make it a tile." The cube went flat. It was now a small green tile, an inch on each side and about a 1/4 inch thick. "Good. Now bigger, big enough to cover your face." The tile grew. It was now an irregular green rectangle, about 8 inches square, hovering in front of the boy's chest. "It's slightly off square," the ring said. "Look at the bottom right corner, bring it in." The boy looked. He saw what the ring meant, the corner pulled in. "Good, now hold it. Don't think about holding it. Think about something else. Anything. Tell me what you had for breakfast." The boy paused for a fraction of a second. He had not, in fact, had breakfast. He had been told that his breakfast was on the counter and to come get it, and when he had come to get it, Dudley had eaten his half, and Petunia had laughed and said, "Well, Duddykins, you must have been hungry," and Vernon had not laughed but had not been displeased. He had had nothing. "Nothing," the boy said. The shield did not waver. The ring noted this with interest. The standard recruit asked an unexpected and uncomfortable question while holding a construct, lost the construct. The boy had not. The boy had told the truth calmly without flinching, and the construct had remained. "All right," the ring said in a slightly different voice. "Now I want you to picture in your head that Uncle Vernon is in the room. He's angry. He has the belt. He is going to swing the belt. The shield is between you and the belt. The shield is going to stop the belt. The shield is not going to let the belt come through. You don't have to fight him. You don't have to hit him. You just have to hold the shield. Can you hold the shield?" The boy's eyes were closed. He nodded. He swings the belt, the ring said. The boy did not flinch. The belt hits the shield. The boy did not flinch. The shield brightened only a little, only enough for the ring to see at the front face. Good, the ring said. Now hold it for a count of 10. The ring counted to 10. The boy held it. Now let it go. The boy let it go. The shield faded smoothly, the way a flashlight fades when the batteries are old, except it was not the batteries, it was the boy releasing it on purpose. The small green cube on his knee also faded out. He looked down at his empty knee and his empty hand. Was that good? He asked. Harry, the ring said, that was very good. How good? The ring took a moment. The ring knew the recruit curve. The ring knew, having absorbed Hal Jordan's memories, what every lantern in the standing corps had done on their first night with their ring. The ring knew in particular what Hal Jordan had done on his first night with his ring, which involved a desert and a runaway train and several confused state troopers. Harry, the ring said. In the Green Lantern Corps, on the first night a new lantern receives a ring, they are tested on what they have just done. They are told what their score is. There was a senior lantern called Kilowog who graded these tests. He was the toughest grader in the Corps. He would not say a recruit was good unless the recruit was actually good. He had a scale. The scale went from 1 to 100. What was the score? For making a small cube in your palm on your first night with no instructor in the room, the standard score, Harry, is about a 6. Was I a 6? You were 38, Harry. The boy was very still. And then I had you make the shield, the ring said, and you held it through an imagined attack. And you didn't flinch, and you didn't drop it, and you let it go on command. The standard score on the shield drill, Harry, in the standing corps, is about a 15. The shield drill on the first night is famously the hardest part of recruit training. A new lantern's first attempt at the shield drill is typically a disaster. The fact that you held the shield at all is, well, Kilowog would have said something about you. He would have said it loudly. He would have said it across the training floor. He would have said it to everybody who could hear. What would he have said? The ring, for the first time in its existence, considered the possibility that a ring could smile. He would have said, Poozer's got it. Poozer, that was what Kilowog called recruits. Was that a nice word? It was the only kind of nice word Kilowog had. The boy almost laughed. He stopped himself before the laugh got out. There was a habit in the cupboard of laughs not getting out, because laughs that came out of the cupboard were occasionally noticed, but the ring saw it. The ring saw also a small dampness on the boy's lashes that had not been there before. All right, the boy said. I can do it. The shield if he tries again. Yes, and nobody'll see it. Not unless you want them to, not yet. All right, he lay down again. He pulled the thin blanket up. The ring made of its own accord a small green warmth around him, a heating construct, the size of a coat, invisible to the cupboard but warm against his skin. The boy noticed. He did not say anything. He smiled very small with his face turned to the wall. Good night, ring, he said. Good night, Harry. A pause. Ring. Yes, can I give you a name, or do you have one already? You said I could give you one. The ring thought. The ring had not, in the 4 days of waiting, decided what name it wanted. The ring had decided to let the boy decide. I would like that, it said. Can I call you Hal? Is that all right? Because the man who made you was called Hal, and I'd like to, if I'm going to talk to you a lot. The ring took a moment. The ring thought about Hal Jordan, who had, in his last conscious thought, asked the ring to be loved, and who had not asked the ring to be him. You can call me Hal, the ring said quietly, if that's what you want. But Harry, Hal isn't here. He's gone. I'm the ring. I'm not him. I have his memories, and I have his voice, and I will try to be the kind of friend he would have been to you. But I'm not him. Is that all right? The boy thought. Then can I call you Ring? The boy said. Just Ring. With a capital R. Yes. Good night, Ring. Good night, Harry. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. It was 3 nights later that Uncle Vernon came for the belt. The boy had not started it. The boy had not done anything, in fact, except spill a small amount of milk on the kitchen floor when he had been told to fetch the milk from the fridge. The milk had spilled because Dudley had stuck his foot out as the boy walked past. Aunt Petunia, who had been watching, had seen the foot. Aunt Petunia had said nothing. Uncle Vernon, when he came home and heard about the milk, had said a great deal. He had said it for about 20 minutes. He had said it in the kitchen, and in the hallway, and on the landing of the stairs, and finally in the small gray sitting room, where the boy was made to stand against the wallpaper, while Uncle Vernon stood opposite him and unbuckled the belt. The belt was leather, the buckle was brass. Aunt Petunia had gone upstairs to give Dudley a bath. Dudley had not been given a bath. Dudley was on the upstairs landing, hanging over the banister, watching. The boy stood against the wallpaper. He was breathing carefully. His right hand was at his side. The ring on his middle finger was warm. Now, boy, Uncle Vernon said. Yes, Uncle Vernon. You are going to learn. Yes, Uncle Vernon. That in this house. Yes, Uncle Vernon. We do not. The boy did not say yes, Uncle Vernon. He did not say anything. He thought with all the will he had of a cube. He made the cube into a tile. He made the tile big enough to cover the front of him and the sides and a little of the back. He made it in his head the color of nothing, not green but invisible, and on his right hand on the middle finger where Uncle Vernon could not see it because the cuff of his sleeve was long, the ring complied. The belt came up. The belt came down. The belt hit the wallpaper a foot to the boy's left. Uncle Vernon, who had been swinging hard, had expected to hit the boy's shoulder. He had not. The belt had, what had the belt done? The belt had stopped in the air about an inch from the boy and had been redirected, without breaking, into the wallpaper. Uncle Vernon stared at the wallpaper. He stared at the belt. He stared at the boy. What? He said. The belt came up again. The belt came down again. The belt did not hit the boy. The belt hit the wallpaper. What? The third time Uncle Vernon, who was many things but who was not entirely a stupid man, did not swing. He looked at the boy. The boy was still standing against the wallpaper. The boy had not moved. The boy's eyes had been green, but in the dim light of the sitting room they looked a little brighter than green, possibly because of the lamp, possibly not. The boy's right hand was at his side. The boy was not crying. The boy was not flinching. The boy was, for the first time in any of the moments Uncle Vernon had ever had the boy in this room, looking directly at him. The boy was, in fact, looking at Uncle Vernon the way a small adult would look at a man who has just very seriously embarrassed himself. Uncle Vernon, who had not seen the construct, because the construct had been arranged to be unseen, felt the temperature of his face change. He felt the temperature of the room change. He felt in a way that he could not have described and would not in the next 4 years ever quite be able to articulate that something in this house had moved and that he had not been consulted about its moving and that the boy in the wallpaper had been consulted and that something, perhaps a very large something, had taken the boy's side. "Get," Uncle Vernon said. "Yes, Uncle Vernon. Get to the cupboard. Yes, Uncle Vernon." "And don't," but Uncle Vernon did not finish the sentence. He never finished that sentence. He turned instead and walked into the kitchen and shut the kitchen door behind him very hard, and the boy, after a moment, peeled himself off the wallpaper and walked calmly down the hallway and let himself into the cupboard and shut the cupboard door and slid the inside bolt that nobody knew the cupboard had and sat down on the thin blanket with his back to the cupboard wall and put his right hand flat on his right knee and looked at the small green ring there. "Ring," he said very quietly. "Yes, Harry, did I do it right? Harry, yes, you did it perfectly. He didn't see it. He didn't see it. He didn't know. He didn't know." A long pause. "Ring," the boy said. "Yes, I think I want to be a lantern. The whole thing, the whole way." The ring took a moment. The ring made a note that this was, by every own protocol, the moment of true induction, the moment after which the ring and the lantern were not two things but one. The ring noted that in the Standard Corps, this moment usually came in the first month, usually after a serious test. The ring noted that the boy had reached it on his 4th night. "All right, Harry," the ring said. "All right. Harry James Potter of Sector 2814, the ring said quietly, in the way Hal Jordan had said it to him a great way off and a long time ago. "You have the ability to overcome great fear. Welcome to the Green Lantern Corps." The boy did not say anything for a while. Then he lay down on the thin blanket on his side, the way he always slept, and he pulled the blanket up to his chin, and he looked at the ring on his hand, and he said very softly to no one in particular, in the voice a boy uses when he is 6 and has decided about something, "All right." The cupboard was small. The blanket was thin. The spiders were many. But the cupboard, for the first time in the boy's memory, was warm. Outside the cupboard door, in the small gray kitchen, Uncle Vernon was pouring a very large drink and not looking at his wife. Inside the cupboard, the boy slept. And the ring, which had crossed a universe, which had been forged from the last love of a dying man, which had spent 4 days waiting, kept watch. It would keep watch every night for the rest of the boy's life. Beloved, it thought, and the boy, who could not hear it think but who had heard, somewhere in his sleep, a low, warm voice with a trace of an American accent that he had never heard before in his life, and did not know how to be afraid of, turned his face into the blanket and smiled. Diamond Suit, Diamond Suit, Diamond Suit. Chapter 3. The 5 years of the cupboard. From the age of 6 to the age of 11, Harry James Potter went to 2 schools. One was the small concrete and asphalt building at the end of Magnolia Crescent, where the teachers were tired and the lunches were gray, and where the boy was, by official policy, ignored. He sat at the back of the classroom and did the work in the books he was given, which were the books Dudley had failed to use in the previous year, and which had small dents in the corners where Dudley had dropped them out of bedroom windows. He turned in his homework on time. His handwriting got, slowly, very good. He learned to read upside down and at speed, because Aunt Petunia would sometimes hand him a folded newspaper and tell him to read out the bit about the weather, and the bit about the weather was always somewhere in the back, and the boy had learned that the fastest way to find the bit about the weather was to flick through every page until he saw the small, smudgy cloud icon, which was easier if he could read upside down. He was not a popular boy. He was not an unpopular boy, either. He was, instead, the kind of boy that the other small boys in his class did not know how to categorize, because he was very quiet, and because the few times Dudley had pushed him at recess, Dudley had somehow ended up sitting down on the asphalt without quite knowing how he had got there. The teachers in the staff room said the boy was peculiar but not dim. They did not say it loud enough to be a problem. The other school met in the cupboard. It met every night after the bolt was slid, and the small wedge the boy had whittled out of a stick was jammed under the door from the inside. The wedge was a small green construct, in fact, but invisible. The boy had asked the ring, very politely, to make it look like a wooden wedge to anybody but him, because if Vernon ever decided to push the cupboard door without unbolting it from the outside, the boy did not want Vernon to think anything except that the door was stuck. It met after Privet Drive went dark. It met until 2 or 3 in the morning, on weekdays, later sometimes on weekends. The boy slept on the cupboard floor about 4 hours a night. He did not get tired, because the ring would not let him be tired in the day. The ring had explained, in the careful, patient way the ring explained everything, that a lantern could borrow against fatigue and pay it back later, and that the boy was paying it back during the daytime arithmetic lesson, which the boy thought was a perfectly fair trade. The school in the cupboard had 3 teachers. The first was the ring itself, who knew the entire own curriculum and had patience that could outweigh any geological event. The ring taught construct engineering. The ring taught will discipline. The ring taught the 72 basic primitives that every lantern was supposed to learn in the first year, and the boy learned them all in the first 9 weeks. The ring then began teaching the 408 intermediate constructs, which the average lantern took 3 years to master, and the boy learned them, not all of them, not perfectly, but the bulk of them, in 11 months. The ring kept a notebook. The notebook was, of course, not a physical notebook. It was a small encoded record in the ring's own lattice, organized by the date the boy had first attempted a given construct, and the percentage of will economy he had achieved on each subsequent attempt. The ring did not show the boy the notebook. The ring did, however, tell the boy his scores. The scores for the first 11 months were a series of numbers between 30 and 90. By the end of the 11 months, the average score had crossed 80 and was climbing slowly. The second teacher was Hal Jordan. Hal was not exactly there. Hal was a Hal was a presence that the ring's memory lattice could project in a particular protected mode while the boy was asleep. The presence was not a hologram. It was not exactly a person. It was something between a dream and a recording, except that it could respond, because the ring could compute what Hal would have said, because the ring contained every memory Hal had ever had and every habit of mind Hal had ever formed, and the ring's projection of Hal, to a confidence interval that the ring assessed at very high, was indistinguishable from Hal Jordan would have been on a good day with a coffee. Sitting on the edge of a small green construct in a small green dreamscape in the middle of his student's brain, Hal taught flying. Flying, the ring had explained, was the most important basic skill a lantern had to develop, because the ring could be tracked by an enemy, and the only way to outrun a competent enemy was to know how to fly fast and well and in 2.5 dimensions. The half-dimension was an own technical concept that the boy understood by the age of 8, and that the boy could not, by the age of 8, have explained in English. It had to do with constructed surfaces that bent through their own normal vectors, and was about how a flying lantern could go around a corner faster than the corner could see her coming. Hal taught flying in the dreamscape, which had been built for the boy's training and which looked, by Hal's deliberate choice, like the salt flats of Nevada at dusk. There were no people in the dreamscape. There were no buildings. There was only the long flat horizon and the orange-red sky, and in the middle distance, a small green stationary cube the size of an airplane hangar, which was Hal's idea of a teaching aid. Around the cube, Hal would say, without touching it, as tight as you can manage, the boy would fly. He was at first terrible. He would clip the cube. He would, on 3 memorable occasions, hit it head-on. He would over-rotate. He would under-rotate. He would, in dreamtime, lose his lunch over the salt flat. He would come up out of the dream the next morning to find the ring already running a debrief. You banked too early on the second pass, the ring would say, while the boy ate his half-slice of toast at the kitchen counter, and Aunt Petunia frowned at him because he was, for some reason, looking pleased today, and Aunt Petunia did not like the boy to look pleased. If you bank that early, your nose pitches up. Your nose pitches up, you bleed energy. You bleed energy, you stall. We talked about this. I know. What's the fix? Delay the bank a half count. Use the rudder more. Don't fight the wing. Good, try it tonight. He tried it that night. He flew better. By the age of 7.5, he could fly all the way around the dream cube cleanly. By the age of 8.5, in the dream, he could fly faster than a small aircraft. By the age of 9, in the real world, on the small flat roof above the garden shed, where Petunia could not see him because of the angle of the kitchen window, he flew for the first time in the air of his own world. A careful, low, 20-foot loop over the garden, 10 feet off the ground, lasting about 6 seconds. The ring let him do it once and then said, with a real edge in its voice, "Inside, Harry." Now, and he went inside, and the ring spent an hour explaining in detail the reasons that visible flight in your own back garden in broad daylight was the single stupidest thing a young lantern could do, and the boy listened, and the boy nodded, and the boy did not, for the next 2 years, fly outdoors in daylight again. He flew at night. He flew, by the age of 10, almost every night. He flew over little winging, low, slow, invisible, the small green ring on his finger covered with a glove the ring had made and that nobody but the boy could see. And he flew over the M25 motorway, faster, watching the headlights crawl below him. And he flew once or twice all the way to the south coast, where he sat on top of a sea stack he had picked out from above and listened to the gulls and thought about how the gulls did not know there was a lantern on the sea stack. And about how the gulls would not have cared. He came home before dawn. He slept. He went to school. He learned, the ring kept saying, very fast. The third teacher in the cupboard was not exactly a teacher. The third teacher was the core. The ring had explained, when the boy was 8, that the core maintained, across all standard sectors, a kind of shared memory. Every lantern, on charging their ring at a central power battery, contributed a small piece of their daily experience to the shared memory. The shared memory was used for training, for tactics, for emergency response, and the ring said in a slightly softer voice, for fellowship. A lantern who was alone on a strange world could, by accessing the shared memory, learn the experiences of every other lantern who had ever been in a similar situation. The shared memory did not, of course, reach the boy's universe. There was no central power battery in the boy's universe. There was, in fact, no core in the boy's universe, only him, only the ring, only the small green presence of Hal Jordan in the dreamscape. But the ring, when it had been forged, had carried with it a kind of compressed snapshot of the shared memory, an archive of about 70,000 lantern lifetimes, condensed and indexed, which the ring could play back on demand. The boy, at 8, asked the ring if he could meet the other lanterns. The ring, after a careful internal debate that took the equivalent of about 3 minutes, said yes. The way it worked was this. The boy would lie down in the cupboard, on the thin blanket, with his right hand flat over his heart and the ring on his finger pointing up at the underside of the staircase. The ring would build, in the dreamscape, a representation of Oa. The representation was, by the ring's own admission, not perfect. It was a Baroque, slightly stylized Oa, the Oa of Hal Jordan's memory of Oa, which was a city of green domes and white towers and small disc-shaped flying tramways and great cliffs of polished bone-colored stone above which floated, at the center of all things, the central power battery in a column of green light the height of a moon. The boy walked these dreamscape streets in a small Green Lantern uniform that the ring had tailored to his proportions, which was the standard core black and white and green with a small adjustment at the shoulders for a 6-year-old, then a 7-year-old, then an 8-year-old. He met lanterns in the dreamscape who were more or less the lanterns themselves, archives of the memories of lanterns the ring had known. He met Kilowog, who shouted at him kindly in a voice like a happy avalanche. He met Tomari, who was a kind of bird-headed scholar from the planet Zudar, and who explained, in detail, the procedure for interrogating a captured construct residue. He met Salak, who had 4 arms and ran the records office and who had no patience for fools but enormous patience for honest, hardworking children. He met Sornik Natu, who was a doctor and Seinstro's daughter, although she would never describe herself that way in either of those orders. He met Arisia, who had been about the boy's age when she had become a lantern, and who treated him in the dreamscape like a younger cousin she was extremely glad to know. He did not meet Seinstro. The ring had elected, after thinking about it for a long time, not to include Seinstro's memory in the dreamscape, on grounds of pedagogical hygiene. The boy did not, at this age, need to meet Seinstro. He did not meet Hal Jordan in any other context than the Salt Flats. The dreamscape Hal was a private teacher, not a core figure. The ring had decided on its own authority that the boy would have Hal to himself, and he did not for a long time, although he asked, "See the guardians." "They're not for you yet," the ring said when the boy asked the second time. "There are 9 of them. They are old. They are not always kind." "They are, Harry. They are like a board of directors that has been on the board for 9 billion years. They are necessary, and many of them are good, and 1 or 2 of them, well, when you're older. When you're ready, I'll know." "How will you know?" "I'll know." The boy accepted this. The boy accepted, in fact, most of what the ring told him. The ring did not lie. The ring did not, in 5 years, lie a single time. The boy noticed. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. By the age of 9, the boy had, by the ring's own evaluation, which the ring believed was conservative, the construct skills of a third-year corsman. He could build a basic sphere in under 100 milliseconds. He could hold a 4-sided pyramid in front of him through a sustained physical attack for as long as the attack lasted. He could build a fishing net the size of a small room. He could build a sword, although the ring was, for the moment, not letting him train with the sword in any context that involved a target, because the sword was the most morally complicated of the basic constructs, and the ring wanted the boy to be at least 10 before they had the conversation about it. By the age of 9.5, the boy had built, on the ring's careful instruction, after about 3 months of design work, a fortress. The fortress was inside the cupboard. Or more precisely, the fortress was inside number 4 Privet Drive, where the cupboard was, and where the boy slept, and where most of his life took place. The fortress was a construct. It was invisible to everybody in number 4 Privet Drive except the boy, because the boy had told the ring to keep it invisible. It was, in 3 dimensions, a series of nested green light shells, like the layers of an onion. The outermost shell coincided more or less with the exterior walls of the house, which meant that any wizard, or for that matter any anti-monitor avatar, attempting to teleport into number 4 Privet Drive without authorization was going to find themselves stopped on the threshold. The middle shell was inside the outermost shell, by about 3 feet, which meant that any unauthorized teleporter who somehow penetrated the outer shell was going to find themselves stuck in the foot of space between the outer shell and the middle one. The boy had asked, with some interest, whether anybody who got stuck there would be killed. The ring had said no, they would only be detained, and the boy had nodded in approval. The ring had noted again that the boy had not asked the question with anticipation, but with something like worry, which was, the ring thought, the right way for a lantern to be asking it. The innermost shell was the smallest. It was a sphere of green light, about 8 feet across, centered on the cupboard under the stairs. Inside the innermost shell, nothing happened that the boy did not authorize. The fortress hummed, very quietly, in a register no muggle ear could hear, and only the boy could see it, and only the boy could move through it, and only the boy could disarm it. The fortress had been there, by the boy's 10th birthday, for nearly 5 months, and nobody at number 4 Privet Drive had noticed, because nobody at number 4 Privet Drive looked at the house with anything like the attention they would have needed. It was an extraordinary thing, the ring thought, to build at 9. The ring had considered, briefly, sending a quiet report to the shared memory about it, to be filed under Recruit Developmental Prodigy Cases. The ring had then remembered that the shared memory was not accessible from this universe, and that the only audience the ring had for the boy's prodigy was the ring itself, and that this was, quite possibly, the saddest thing about being a lantern across universes, which was that you could not, in the end, brag about your kid to anyone but yourself. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. The boy turned 10 in late July of the year before Hogwarts. He turned 10 with a slice of toast on a chipped plate, given to him by Aunt Petunia, who had not, to her credit, the boy thought in his careful private way, entirely forgotten that it was his birthday, although she had not gone so far as to say happy birthday, and had not put a candle on the toast. Dudley, who had been 10 in June, had had a cake and a bicycle and a set of 14 presents wrapped in glossy paper. The boy at 10 had toast. The boy ate the toast. That night in the cupboard, the ring had a surprise. The surprise had been, in fact, planned for 9 months. The ring had organized it carefully. The dreamscape Oa, on the night of the boy's 10th birthday, had been decorated for a party. There were lanterns in the dreamscape who had not been there before, lanterns the ring had not previously introduced, because the ring had been saving them for the party. There was Kilowog in a chef's apron. There was Tomari with a small ribbon around his ear tuft. There was Arisia, who had baked in the dreamscape what the dreamscape thought a Eudarian birthday cake was, which was a translucent yellow thing of about 9 layers, with a small flame at the top that did not actually burn anything. There was a low orange Nevada sky. There was on a small green platform in the middle of the dreamscape Hal Jordan. Hal Jordan was sitting on the edge of the platform. He had a coffee in one hand. He was looking down at the boy as the boy walked into the dreamscape, and his face was the face of a man who had been waiting for this evening for a long time. The boy stopped at the edge of the platform. "It's my birthday," the boy said. "I know," Hal said. Are these for me?" "They are. All of them, Harry." The boy looked around the dreamscape. There were, by his count, about 40 lanterns in the immediate area. There were more in the middle distance, small green shapes coming and going on the disc tramways, glancing toward the platform, raising fists in salute. There was, in the very deep distance, the central power battery, glowing very gently. The boy looked at Hal Jordan. The boy who had not, in any of his 9 years of life so far, ever had a birthday party, did the thing he had been trying for 9 years not to do. He cried. He cried hard in the dreamscape on the platform, in front of 40 lanterns, and Hal Jordan and Kilowog in a chef's apron. Hal Jordan, who was a memory, who was a recording, who was a presence projected by a ring on a finger of a boy in a cupboard a universe away, set the coffee down and stood up, and came around the platform, and knelt on the platform floor in front of the boy, and put both hands on the boy's shoulders, the way the ring's memory remembered Martin Jordan kneeling, and putting both hands on Hal's shoulders 38 years earlier, and said the thing that Martin Jordan had said. "You're not afraid, son. I know you're not. I know because I've been watching you. You're not afraid. You've got the better of every fear in this hangar. And one day you're going to look back at this and know that I was right." The boy stood very still. "I'm proud of you, Harry," Hal said. "I am very, very proud of you." The boy did not answer. Hal said very quietly into the boy's hair, "I'm sorry, I'm not really here." The boy did not answer to that either. He put both arms around Hal Jordan's neck and held on. Hal Jordan, who was, the boy knew, the boy had known for 4 years now, not really there, held him back. The grip was real. The ring made the grip real. The ring made the warmth real. The ring made the heartbeat real, which was a small touch the ring had not, until that moment, decided to include, and which it included now because the boy had spent 10 years without one and it was the boy's birthday. After a while the boy stepped back and looked at Kilowog and asked, in a small voice that did not, even now, quite know how to ask, "Is there a cake?" "There is a cake, Poozer," said Kilowog in his happy avalanche voice. "There is the biggest cake, get over here." The boy ate cake. He ate cake with 40 lanterns. He ate cake with Tomari and Arija and Soranik Natu and Salak. He ate cake with Hal Jordan, who sat across from him at a small green table and asked him, in a serious voice that was not making fun of the question, what was his favorite subject in school. And the boy said maths, and Hal said, "Well, that's a lantern subject if I ever heard one," and the boy laughed for the first time in any reasonable count of weeks, and the laugh was a real laugh, the kind he had been keeping in for years, and the laugh got out, and nobody in the cupboard heard it. And nobody on Oa was real enough to hear it, but everybody at the small green table heard it perfectly. It was, the ring thought, the best night of its existence. It was, the boy thought, in the small dark cupboard at 3 in the morning, when the dreamscape had quietly faded, the best night of his life so far. He went to sleep with the ring on his hand and his face on the thin blanket and his cheeks still a little wet, and he slept hard, and he did not wake up until noon. Aunt Petunia, when she finally opened the cupboard door at noon, was prepared to be angry. She had had, by that point, several hours to prepare. She had a long, sharp speech ready about the laziness of certain children, and the responsibility of bringing themselves down to breakfast, and the impossibility of ever being grateful enough for the home she had given them when she had not, strictly, been required to. She opened the cupboard door with the speech ready on her lips. The boy looked up at her. The boy was eating a small piece of bread that he had taken last night from the kitchen counter when the kitchen had been empty and that he had saved in the cupboard for breakfast. The boy looked at Aunt Petunia and smiled at her. The smile was, Aunt Petunia would not have admitted this to anyone, but she noticed it, a very polite smile, the kind of smile a hostess receives at the end of a successful dinner. The boy said, "Good morning, Aunt Petunia." The boy said, "I'm sorry I overslept." The boy did not say anything else. Aunt Petunia's speech, which had been ready, was suddenly not ready. She stood in the hallway for a moment and could not somehow find any of the words she had been planning to use. She closed the cupboard door. She did not bolt it. She had not, the boy noticed, bolted the cupboard door in a long time. She had, in fact, although the boy was not yet sure she knew this herself, gradually become a little afraid of the boy in the cupboard, in a way she could not have explained, in a way she would not have admitted to Vernon. The cupboard was, by some measure she did not have a word for, a place she did not want to look into for too long. The cupboard hummed a very little when she stood near it. She put it down to the boiler. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. A year later, On the morning of the boy's 11th birthday, the first letter arrived. It arrived, in the standard way, in a beak. The owl came down through the early light of Privet Drive and landed on the lip of the kitchen window and dropped the letter on the sill. And the letter, heavy paper, green wax, sat there for almost a minute before Aunt Petunia screamed. The boy, who was upstairs at that moment with the bread knife on the counter and a small, careful plan to make himself a sandwich, came down and looked at the letter on the windowsill and felt. He would later describe this to Hal Jordan in the dreamscape, a kind of cool, slow recognition, as if the letter were an envelope he had been expecting for a long time and had merely forgotten the precise date of. The boy picked up the letter. The address read, Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, 4 Privet Drive, Little Winging, Surrey. The boy looked at the address for a long minute. Then he looked at Aunt Petunia, who was breathing very fast in the corner of the kitchen and whose right hand was, the boy noticed, half raised in a gesture that the boy did not entirely have a word for. Aunt Petunia, the boy said very politely. Don't open that. I know what it is. Aunt Petunia looked at him. I think, the boy said, I would like to talk to you about it, now, before Uncle Vernon comes downstairs. Aunt Petunia sat down at the kitchen table. The boy sat down across from her. He did not, this time, ask permission. He took an apple from the bowl in the middle of the table and put it on his placemat, and then put both his hands flat on the table on either side of the apple. He looked at his aunt with the slightly tilted head he had developed for occasions when he was about to ask a question whose answer he already knew. You're a witch, he said. I am not. I'm sorry, I mean my mother was a witch. Yes, and you knew. Yes, and you knew this letter would come. Yes. And you decided, the boy said gently, almost without any kind of accusation in his voice, not to tell me. Yes, the boy nodded. He had, the ring noted with admiration, neither raised his voice nor lowered his eyes. He had in fact conducted himself in the kitchen of number 4 Privet Drive in a way that suggested he had spent 5 years learning, among other things, the procedures of a senior lantern conducting a debrief with a local operation witness. The ring made a private note. The note was filed under, the boy is possibly going to be quite formidable in about 10 years. All right, Aunt Petunia, the boy said. Thank you, I'm going to read this letter now, and then I am going to go to this school. And then when I am at school, I am going to be at school. So you and Uncle Vernon and Dudley will, I think, be more comfortable. Is that all right? Aunt Petunia, who had been ready all morning for screaming and tears and a small angry boy crying in the corner of her kitchen, found instead that she was being politely managed by an 11-year-old wizard. She did not have a script for this. She nodded. The boy opened the letter. He read it. He set it down. He took a bite of the apple. He looked at his aunt. He said in the same polite voice, I will need someone to take me to a place called Diagon Alley. Can you? Number all right. Will you write a letter to the school and tell them so? Yes, thank you, Aunt Petunia. The boy ate his apple. He went upstairs. He shut the door to the small bedroom that was, technically, his bedroom now. He had been moved out of the cupboard the previous summer. After Aunt Petunia had had a kind of small, slow break she was not telling Vernon about and had decided that the cupboard was wrong and that the boy should sleep in Dudley's second bedroom, where Dudley kept the toys he had outgrown, which was every toy Dudley had ever owned. And he sat on the bed and looked at the small green ring on the middle finger of his right hand. Ring, he said. Yes, Harry, we're going to school. We are. Tell me again about the sorting hat. The ring told him about the sorting hat. The ring had been doing some research in the last year on the basis of what little information the boy had been able to find in the small village library, and the ring had supplemented this with logical extrapolation, and with patterns the ring had noticed in Aunt Petunia's careful avoidances. The ring did not, of course, know everything, but the ring knew enough. Where do you want to be sorted? The ring asked. The boy thought. I don't know, he said honestly. I don't know enough. But I think I want to be where the brave people are, if there are any. There are. That's where Hal would have been. Yes, I want to be where Hal would have been. All right, Harry. A pause. The boy looked at the ring. Ring. Yes. I'm a little scared. That's all right. Is it? Harry, the ring said, you have in the last 5 years been afraid every single day, and you have every single day beaten the fear. You will beat this one. I will be with you. Hal will be with you. The whole Corps, in the way that the Corps can be with you here, will be with you. There is nothing at this school that you cannot handle. The school will be interesting. The school will be a challenge. The school will, in some ways, be the easiest 5 years you have ever had. Easiest. Easier than the cupboard. Yes, the boy nodded slowly. He looked down at the small green ring on his hand. He covered it, by habit, with the cuff of his sleeve. He stood up. All right, he said. Let's go shopping. There was in the boy's 8th year a particular conversation that the ring would later file under one of the most important conversations of the boy's life. It happened on a Thursday in November in the cupboard at around 11 o'clock at night, after the boy had returned from the dreamscape and was lying on his back on the thin blanket looking up at the underside of the staircase. The boy said, "Ring, yes, Harry. Why am I like this, the way I am? Why was Hal able to find me? Why not somebody else? There must be lots of children in the universe who are in cupboards. There must be many." The ring took, for one of the only times in its long career with the boy, a long moment to answer. "Harry, there are many, yes, then why?" That, Harry, is a question I have thought about for 2.5 years now, and I do not have a complete answer for. I have a partial one. I will tell you the partial one, please. Hal Jordan, when he forged me, had a particular set of criteria. He could not, by the limits of the procedure, send a ring to every child who was in a cupboard, anywhere in the multiverse. He could send one ring. He had to choose. He chose you by my best read for 3 reasons. The first is that you were, by the Lantern Corps' standard recruit evaluation, very high on the courage curve. The second is that you were, by an independent measure, very high on what the Guardians call the heart curve, the measure of how much, in a given being, the capacity for love survives long stretches of unkindness. The third is, Harry, that he had heard the prophecy. He believed, by the prophecy's terms, that you were going to face Voldemort regardless of whether he intervened. He believed, by his own private judgment, that you were going to die in the facing if he did not intervene. So he intervened. And the other children. In other cupboards who don't have prophecies. They do not, Harry, they do not have a Hal Jordan. The boy looked at the underside of the staircase for a long minute. That isn't fair. It isn't fair, Harry. What about them? The ring, the recording, the projection of Hal Jordan's last love took a long moment. Harry, it said, I would like to make you an offer. Yes. You are, by every metric the Corps has, going to grow up into one of the strongest lanterns the Corps has ever produced. You are not going to be the strongest. Hal Jordan is the strongest, by a fairly wide margin, and you are going to be approximately number 5, which is, Harry, extraordinary. You are going to have, by the time you are 30, a great deal of power. You are going to have, by the time you are 30, the kind of influence that allows you to make policy. You are going to, in fact, by the time you are 30, sit at a table in your own universe and decide, to some degree, what the magical world does about poverty, and about children, and about cupboards. That isn't fair either. It isn't, Harry. Lanterns are not granted on a fair basis. They are granted on a courage basis. The world, Harry, is unjust on many axes, and the Corps does not pretend it has fixed those axes. The Corps has only chosen to be present at certain times in certain rooms to do what it can. I would like, Harry, to ask you, when you are 30, to use your influence, your power, your visibility, your money, your authority, to be present in certain rooms on behalf of the other children in cupboards. I would like you to spend a meaningful portion of your life making, by patient, unglamorous work, by quiet, professional generosity, by the kind of effort that no biographer ever wants to spend a chapter on, the world less full of cupboards. Will you? The boy was quiet for a long minute. Yes, he said, you don't have to decide tonight. I am deciding tonight. I will. Yes, Harry, yes, you are 8. I know, you are going to grow up. Circumstances will change. You do not have to keep an 8-year-old's promise. I will keep this one. The ring took a small moment. Then the ring said, then on behalf of every child in a cupboard in this universe, and in every other universe I am aware of, and on behalf of the Corps, and on behalf of Hal Jordan, who I am almost certain would say this if he were here, thank you. We will hold you to it. Please do. The boy turned on his side. He pulled the thin blanket up. The ring made of its own accord a small green warmth around him. The boy slept. The ring kept watch. The cupboard, for the 816th night in a row, was warm. The boy did in the end keep the promise. He kept it at 23 when he founded, quietly, with very little press, the Hal Jordan Trust for Children in Care, which by the time the boy was 30 had become the largest such organization in the British wizarding world, and was operating also 3 branches in Muggle counties. He kept it at 40, when he and Hermione co-authored the report that the Wisengamot would later cite in passing the Children in Households Act, which made the kind of childhood the boy himself had been given a criminal matter rather than a private one. He kept it, in many small daily ways, for the rest of his life. He did not, ever, after the conversation in the cupboard in his 8th year, take the promise lightly. The ring, all those years, kept count. The ring was, after a long time, very satisfied with the count. Diamond Suit, Diamond Suit, Diamond Suit, Chapter 4, The Quirrell Mort Cage. The man who came to fetch the boy from Privet Drive, at the boy's polite written request, sent by Owl, after the boy had written 8 drafts and discarded 6 and let the 7th be edited by the Ring, was a half-giant called Rubeus Hagrid. He arrived on a Tuesday morning at 11:10. He did not knock. He instead removed the front door from its frame by the simple expedient of pushing on it, which the boy thought, watching from the upstairs window, was probably going to be a topic for the Dreamscape debrief later. Hagrid looked around the small hallway of number 4 Privet Drive with an expression suggesting that he had been told, repeatedly, what to expect, and was nevertheless disappointed by what he had found. He looked up the stairs. He saw the boy at the top of the stairs. The boy was already dressed, a clean shirt, the cleanest he had, and a pair of trousers that had been Dudley's 2 years ago and which were now slightly too small for the boy, but were, on Hagrid's first inspection, the best the boy had, and the boy was holding a small canvas bag in one hand, and the boy's other hand was at his side, with the cuff of the sleeve pulled down over the middle finger in the careful, unconscious way the boy had been pulling cuffs down over middle fingers for 5 years. "Harry," said Hagrid, "you're Harry." "Yes," said the boy, "I'm Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts. Yale have heard o' Hogwarts. I've read the letter." "Your aunt, said ye were ready to go." "I am." Hagrid looked around the hallway again. He looked at the door of the cupboard under the stairs, which was open and which was empty, and which had, the boy had noticed yesterday, the small wooden wedge still on the floor inside. Hagrid looked at the boy. "Yeah, ye didn't grow up in there, did ye, Harry?" The boy did not answer. "Right," said Hagrid, who did not need an answer to certain questions, and who had in his life learned how to recognize them. "Right, well, come on then. We'll have a hot breakfast on the way. Ye look hungry." The boy was technically hungry, but the boy had by long habit been hungry in a way that was, by now, a kind of background to him. He nodded politely. He walked down the stairs. Hagrid offered an enormous hand. The boy took it. Aunt Petunia did not come to see the boy off. Uncle Vernon, who was in his study with the door shut, did not either. Dudley was at the top of the stairs in his pajamas with his eyes very wide and his mouth slightly open, and the boy, who had not, in many years, said anything in particular to Dudley, paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked up at his cousin and said, "Goodbye, Dudley." Dudley, who had not, in many years, said anything in particular to the boy that was not unpleasant, said, after a long moment, "Bye, Harry." It was the first time Dudley had used the boy's name. It would not be the last. The boy stepped out of number 4 Privet Drive with Hagrid behind him, and the front door, which Hagrid had set carefully against the wall, was left to be replaced by Uncle Vernon, and the small green outermost shell of the boy's fortress, which had been there for 19 months now, was, with a quiet internal command from the boy's right hand, dismissed. The shells faded. The house settled. The Dursleys would never know that, for 19 months, no harm had been able to come to them under their own roof except by their own consent. This was, the Ring would later say to the boy, a kindness the Dursleys had not deserved, and that you gave them anyway, and that is a Lantern thing. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. The boy's first impression of Diagon Alley in the second-floor London afternoon was that it was too loud. He said as much quietly to the Ring, on the inside of his head. The Ring, which had been quietly humming to itself ever since they had stepped onto a strange-looking street through the back wall of a pub, agreed. His second impression was that it was too rich. Diagon Alley was, the boy thought, a street built for people who had a great deal of money and an excessive interest in objects that did not, by any obvious measure, do anything. The third impression was that it was, in a deeper and more interesting way, very poor. The shops along Diagon Alley, and the boy looked at them with the careful, attentive eyes of a boy who had spent 5 years training to notice everything, were small. The windows had grime. The cobbles had cracks. There were people sleeping in alley mouths. There were, the boy noticed, no children of color of any kind on the street, although there were children of color on the high street he had walked down 4 hours ago in Surrey, and there were, in fact, very few children at all in Diagon Alley, except those his own age, here to buy school supplies. The boy filed this away. Hagrid, on the careful instructions of someone the boy was going to be paying attention to in the immediate future, took him first to Gringotts. The boy met goblins. The boy was unsurprised by goblins. The boy had been told in the dreamscape about Tomaree, and a goblin was not, to a boy who had eaten birthday cake at a small green table with a bird-headed Zudarian, a particularly alarming sight. The boy was polite to the goblin at the counter. The goblin, who did not get politeness from most 11-year-old wizards, returned the politeness. The boy descended in a small cart with Hagrid. The boy was shown his vault. The boy was, for the first time in his life, told the size of his own family's fortune. He looked at the small gold mountain in the vault for a long moment. He said to Hagrid, "Are these all mine?" "Aye, and nobody told me." "Your aunt ye weren't told a lot, were ye?" The boy thought about this. He took, by Hagrid's recommendation, a small bag of gold coins, enough for his school expenses and for some travel money. He did not, although the temptation was there, take more. He had decided in conversation with the ring in the cupboard 6 months earlier that he was not, on his first day in the wizarding world, going to walk out of a wizarding bank carrying anything that looked like a fortune. He took, instead, a sensible amount. He thanked the goblin. He noted the goblin's slightly raised eyebrow as he left, which the boy interpreted correctly as the goblin equivalent of, "This child I will be watching with interest." Hagrid then took him to a robe shop where a small, severe woman called Madame Malkin pinned his measurements with quick, efficient hands while he stood on a footstool. Next to him on a second footstool was a thin blonde boy in a similar fitting. The blonde boy gave him a long, appraising look. "First year at Hogwarts," said the blonde boy. "Yes, my father's next door buying my books and my mother's up the street looking at wands." "I see. I think I shall try and bully my father into buying me a racing broom. Even though first years aren't allowed them, I think I'll smuggle it in somehow." "All right," said the boy, who could not, for the life of him, see why he was supposed to react to any of this. "You haven't got your own broom. Number, play Quidditch at all." "Number, I do. Father says it's a crime if I'm not picked for my house team," the blonde boy went on. The boy listened politely. The boy had, in the cupboard, become very good at listening politely. One of Hal Jordan's bits of advice, from the Salt Flats, had been that the second fastest way to learn about a stranger was to ask them questions, and the fastest way was to let them talk and not interrupt. The boy was, for the moment, letting this stranger talk. He was learning, the boy thought, about a kind of wizard. He was also learning, with some interest, about the shape of the wizarding world, the houses at Hogwarts and what they meant, the contempt some wizards had for other wizards whose families were new to magic, the importance in this strange small society of certain old surnames. The boy filed it away. The blonde boy eventually said, "What's your surname anyway? I haven't asked." "Potter." There was a silence. "Oh," the blonde boy said again. You're the, I am." The blonde boy, the boy noticed, did several things at once. The blonde boy's posture changed, very slightly, in a manner the boy had not before now ever seen, but which he recognized at once from a memory of Hal Jordan's. The posture of a man at a poker table who has just decided that his hand is, on reflection, slightly worse than the hand across from him. The blonde boy reset his expression. The blonde boy held out his hand. The boy considered this for a moment, then took the hand. The handshake was firm. The boy noted the firmness. The boy noted that the blonde boy had been taught to give a firm handshake, and had probably been taught it by a father who was, by every indication so far, exactly the kind of father the boy had spent 5 years being glad he did not have. "Malfoy," said the blonde boy. "Draco Malfoy. Pleased to meet you, Draco Malfoy. And to meet you, Potter." The fitting concluded. The blonde boy stepped off his footstool. He said as he was leaving, I'll see you on the train." "You will, good." The blonde boy left. The boy looked at himself in the mirror. He thought for the first time in his memory that his shoulders were sitting evenly in a piece of clothing that had been cut for them. He liked it. He bought, by Hagrid's recommendation, an owl. He bought a cauldron. He bought, at Flourish and Blot's, his books. He bought, at Ollivander's, his wand. The wand was an event the boy did not entirely understand. Mr. Ollivander, a thin, pale man with eyes that the boy thought, at first sight, looked too much like the eyes of a thing accustomed to looking at people very carefully, and not for very kind reasons, handed him 11 wands in a row before the right one settled into his fingers. When the right one settled into his fingers, the small bench behind him caught a brief whisper of green that the boy was almost sure was not from the wand. Mr. Ollivander, who had also seen it, looked at the boy thoughtfully. "Curious," he said. "Curious. Mr. Potter, may I ask you something?" "Yes. Is there perhaps a second instrument on your person?" The boy looked at Mr. Ollivander for a long moment. The ring on the inside of his head said quietly, "He's perceptive, Harry. Don't lie, but don't show him either. Tell him as little as you have to." "There is," the boy said, "but I would prefer not to discuss it." Mr. Ollivander, who had spent his life among children with secrets, smiled, a small, careful, knowing smile. "Very wise, Mr. Potter," he said. "Very wise, then we shall not discuss it. The wand is 11 inches holly with a core of phoenix feather. It is curious. The phoenix that gave that feather gave one other. I think we may expect great things from you, Mr. Potter, or terrible, or both." "Thank you." The boy paid. The boy left. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. He spent the rest of the day with Hagrid, who took him for an enormous lunch at a pub off the alley, and who paid for it, and who would not let the boy pay him back. Hagrid, the boy noted, was a kind man. Hagrid, the boy noted, was also a deeply indiscreet man. Hagrid in 2 hours managed to tell the boy several pieces of information that the boy was almost sure he was not supposed to have, including the name of the man who had killed his parents, the existence of a small parcel currently in Vault 713 that Hagrid had collected on Dumbledore's orders, and the location of Dumbledore's office at Hogwarts, a moving staircase behind a gargoyle, password to be set later. The boy listened and nodded, and asked the obvious follow-up questions, and made sure his face was always exactly the face of a small boy hearing these things for the first time. The boy was, after all, a small boy hearing some of these things for the first time. He was hearing some of them for the second time, because the ring had told him most of what could be inferred from a 5-year-old's mother's photograph, and from a yearbook from a school called St. Brutus's that Aunt Petunia kept in the attic, and which the ring had read at 4 in the morning over the boy's shoulder through the attic's only skylight. But Hagrid was, for the first time, telling him about Tom Riddle. Tom Riddle, said the boy carefully, when Hagrid had taken a great drink of his pint and seemed to be regretting having said the name out loud. Is that his real name? Aye. But best not say it. Most folks call him you-know-who. You-know-who. Aye, Hagrid, said the boy. I think it would be easier if I just called him by his name, if that's all right. Whatever ye want, Harry. Ye're brave. Not very, said the boy honestly, and Hagrid, who had taken an instant liking to this small, polite boy who had been raised in a cupboard and who knew it, did not contradict him. The boy returned to Privet Drive that evening with his trunk and his owl. Aunt Petunia did not speak to him. Uncle Vernon did not speak to him. Dudley again was at the top of the stairs, looking at the trunk, looking at the owl. Dudley did not speak either. The boy went up the stairs to the small bedroom, and he packed slowly, and he went to bed in a bed for the second night running, and he slept well, and the ring kept watch, and the next morning at 7 o'clock the boy was up and dressed and standing on the doorstep with his trunk and his owl, and Hagrid was there with the same enormous cab, and the boy was on his way. He did not say goodbye to anyone in number 4 Privet Drive. He did not need to. Diamond Suit, Diamond Suit, Diamond Suit, the Hogwarts Express was a kind of structured chaos that the boy enjoyed enormously. He found a compartment near the back of the train. He sat down. He put the trunk in the rack. He put the owl cage on the seat opposite. He looked out the window at the bustle. He thought, with some amusement, that the bustle of King's Cross Station was much more comfortable to him than the bustle of Diagon Alley had been, because the bustle of King's Cross was the bustle of Muggles, and the boy had been raised in a Muggle world. The bustle of Diagon Alley, by contrast, had been the bustle of a society he had not been raised in, and which had certain rules he had been working hard in the last 40 hours to deduce. He had not deduced all of them yet. He was, he thought, going to deduce a great many of them in the coming week. A red-haired boy of about his age put his head into the compartment. Anyone sitting there? He said, gesturing at the seat opposite the boy. Everywhere else is full. No, said the boy. Please sit. The red-haired boy sat. He looked at the boy across from him. The boy noticed with some amusement the moment the red-haired boy registered the scar. The red-haired boy, to his credit, did not stare. The red-haired boy said, "You're Harry Potter." "I am. Ron Weasley." "Pleased to meet you, Ron." "Pleased to meet you, Harry. Should I call you Harry?" "Yes." There was a small pause. Ron Weasley, who was the boy's age, who was the 6th of 7 children, who had spent the last week being told by his older brothers all the things he would and would not be allowed to do at Hogwarts, who was wearing a sweater his mother had knitted him that was slightly too tight at the wrists, who had freckles like the constellation Cassiopeia across the bridge of his nose, looked at the boy across from him and said, in a small, honest voice that was not putting on any kind of show, "Sorry." "I'm sorry, I've never met a famous person before." The boy looked at him. "Ron," said the boy, "I am not, I think, a famous person. I am a person to whom a famous thing happened. It is, the more I think about it, a different category. Will you tell me about the train?" Ron Weasley smiled. "Yeah," said Ron, "all right." They were friends for the rest of their lives. Diamond Suit, Diamond Suit, Diamond Suit. The boy was sorted into Gryffindor. The sorting hat, when set upon the boy's head, had, the boy noticed, a moment of confusion. The hat read the boy's mind. The hat encountered, in the boy's mind, certain features it had not encountered before in the mind of any 11-year-old. The hat encountered the ring. The hat, the boy thought, listening, drew back from the ring, the way the hat had been trained to draw back from any magical object it did not recognize, and then drew toward the ring, the way the hat had been trained to lean into any magical object that was, on closer inspection, harmless. "You're an unusual one, Mr. Potter," said the hat very quietly in the boy's ear. "I know. You've got, let me see, courage, plenty, good, a keen mind, a great talent, loyalty, patience." "Oh, that's interesting. A second mind. A second mind, that is, by my reading, very fond of you. Where on earth did you get a second mind, Mr. Potter? He's a friend. Well, where to put you? There would have been a case for Ravenclaw with this second mind. There would have been a case for Slytherin with with that. There would have been a case for Hufflepuff with yes, but number no, you've been brave for too long, Mr. Potter, and you've made a habit of it, and the habit is one of the cleanest habits I've ever seen on someone this small. There's only one house for that. Gryffindor. The hall cheered. The boy got up. He walked to the table that was cheering. Ron Weasley, who had been sorted to the same house a few minutes earlier, scooted over and made room. The boy sat. The boy ate his first meal under the enchanted ceiling and looked up at it from time to time and noted in his careful inner way that the magic of this place was, for the first time in his life that he had seen, a magic of warmth. The ring on his finger under the cuff of his new black robes hummed quietly. The boy looked up at the high table. He saw at the high table the man he had been told was the headmaster, a long-bearded old man with a kind of permanent twinkle who, the boy could tell at a glance, was watching the boy with extreme interest while pretending to be watching the dessert tray. The boy met the eye of the long-bearded old man for a fraction of a second. The boy looked away politely. The boy made a small private note. He saw also at the high table a thin pale man with greasy hair and a long nose who, when the boy looked at him, looked away. The man's left arm, the boy noticed, was carrying something. The man, when he turned, was holding the back of his head in a way that suggested it ached. The ring on the boy's finger very quietly hummed. The boy looked at his roast chicken and did not look at the man with the turban next to the thin, pale man, although the ring was, at this distance, through this much intervening magical interference, in this much ambient noise, making a small private observation about the man with the turban that the boy filed away for later. He met Hermione Granger in the train. He met her again at the sorting. He met her on the third day of term, properly, in the corridor outside Charms, when she had been told by a third-year boy that her hair was very bushy, and the boy, without thinking about it very much, although in retrospect this was an act he was going to be very glad he had done, said conversationally to the third-year boy that he thought her hair was the right amount of bushy and that the third-year boy might consider whether his comment had improved anybody's morning. The third-year boy looked at him. The third-year boy, who had been told several stories about the small new Potter boy in Gryffindor, decided that he had business elsewhere. The third-year boy left. Hermione Granger looked at the boy. The boy said, "Hello, we've met. I'm sorry I didn't say much. The train was a bit much." "Oh," said Hermione. "Yes, I'm Harry. I know. I would like to be your friend, I think, if that's all right." Hermione Granger stared at him for a long minute. She was 11 years old. She was, by her own count, in the second most lonely week of her life so far, the first having been the week the Hogwarts letter had arrived, and she had had to explain to her parents what a witch was. She had, in the last 3 days, not had a single conversation that had ended with anyone wanting to be her friend. "Yes," said Hermione Granger. "All right." She was their friend for the rest of their lives. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. The thing the boy did not, in the first month, do was display the ring. The ring had told him, in long, careful conversations across the late summer, that there were several reasons to keep the ring out of sight at Hogwarts for a while. The first was that the magic of this world, the boy had been told, was sensitive to other forms of energy, and a lantern's ring, freely radiating would set off every magical instrument in the building. The second was that the boy did not, on his first month at Hogwarts, want to be a story. The boy was already a story. The boy did not want to be 2 stories. The third was the most important. The boy did not know, on his first month at Hogwarts, who at the school he could trust. The ring suggested that the boy spend the first month identifying allies before unveiling himself. The boy accordingly learned wand magic. He learned wand magic, the ring noted with interest, faster than any other student in his year. He learned it faster than Hermione, who learned it faster than anyone else. He did not, however, learn it ostentatiously. He did not raise his hand much. He did not, in the early weeks, show off. He let Hermione raise her hand. He let Hermione answer the questions. He, in his own quiet way, paid attention and read the textbook on the night he received it, and practiced the spell once in the dormitory and once in the corridor outside Transfiguration, and arrived at each class already knowing the spell. He passed the in-class tests. He moved to the next spell. He was, by the second week, a small, steady B+ student who was, Professor McGonagall noted in her small private notebook, almost certainly an A+ student in disguise. McGonagall did not say so. McGonagall, who knew a great many things and who had not survived as long as she had by being indiscreet, sat back and watched. The boy paid attention also to Professor Quirrell. Professor Quirrell taught defense against the dark arts. Professor Quirrell wore a large purple turban. Professor Quirrell stammered. Professor Quirrell on certain days smelled, to the boy's specific notice, of garlic and of something the boy could not identify, but which the ring identified as a low-grade emanation of the kind of dark magic the ring had read about in Hermione's textbooks. The boy, on the first day he had defense against the dark arts, walked into the classroom and immediately noted three things. The ring on his finger hummed slightly at a frequency the boy had not heard before. The back of Professor Quirrell's turban, when Quirrell turned to write on the board, had a strange faint shimmer that nobody else in the classroom seemed to notice, and the boy's scar on his forehead ached. The boy made a private list. The list grew. By the end of October, the list had grown enough that the boy held, on a Saturday evening, a small private meeting in the dormitory, in his curtains-drawn four-poster, with the ring. "Ring," he said quietly. "Yes, Harry." "What is on the back of his head?" "Voldemort, Harry, or something very like him." "Inside, Quirrell." "Yes." "How?" "Possession. The scan is not clean. The dark magic is interfering. But yes, there is a second consciousness inside Quirrell's body. It is, by my best read, the wraith of Tom Riddle, who is your enemy. And he's living on the back of Quirrell's head. He is, in a manner of speaking. The turban contains him. The turban is not, however, a containment of the kind I would build. The turban is a kind of veil. It hides him. It does not stop him." The boy thought. "What can I do?" he said. The ring took a moment. "I would suggest," said the ring, "that we wait. There is something he wants in this school. I do not yet know what. He has been here for at least 2 months. He has not yet taken it. Why? Because he can't reach it. That's my best guess. He's locked out. Something is in the way. And when he tries to get past whatever is in the way, he will be in a place where he is alone, and we can take him. Take him. I propose," said the ring in a very level voice, "that we contain him, bind him, strip him from Quirrell's body. Hand him over for processing." "To whom?" "Eventually," said the ring carefully, "to Oa. I will not go into the details now. There is a procedure, there is a place, there is a council. If we get the wraith to Oa, it cannot return, not in any form, not ever." The boy looked at the curtain of his four-poster. "All right," he said. "Then when he moves, we move." "Yes, and we don't tell Dumbledore." The ring took a moment. "I would prefer to tell Dumbledore," said the ring. "But Harry, you should know Dumbledore is on your side. He is. But he is also a man with a plan. The plan involves you. The plan involves you being, in some sense, the person who fights Voldemort at the end of the long story. The plan does not, in its current configuration, involve you containing him for processing in your first year of school. If we tell Dumbledore, Dumbledore will, gently, kindly, insist that we wait. He will not, by my read, accept the option of taking Voldemort off the board now. He thinks we cannot. We can. We can. Then we don't tell him. Then we don't tell him." The boy nodded. The boy waited. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. The night Voldemort moved was the night of the Halloween feast. The boy, who had been watching Quirrell for 2 months, noticed at the start of dinner that Quirrell was not at the high table. The boy looked at the ring. The ring confirmed. Quirrell was, by its read, in the dungeon, not by chance, by design. There was, at the same moment, a small noise, barely audible to the human ear, that the ring identified as a troll. The boy understood, with a kind of cold, clean clarity, that the troll was a diversion. Quirrell, the ring confirmed, 10 minutes later, was now on the 3rd floor. The boy left the feast. He did not draw attention to himself. He picked up Hermione on the way. Hermione had been crying in the bathroom, and Hermione he was not leaving in a corridor with a troll loose, even if the troll was a diversion, and Hermione, when he found her, looked at his face and said, "Harry, where are you going?" "To the 3rd floor." "You can't." "Hermione," he said very gently, "you can come or you can go back to the dormitory with Ron. Either is fine. I have something to do." Hermione looked at him for a long moment. "I'm coming," she said. "Thank you." They went. Ron Weasley, who had hung back in the entry hall and who had been arguing with himself about which way to run, saw them go past and made his own private decision in about half a second and ran after them. The 3rd floor at Hogwarts, the boy already knew, contained a corridor that the headmaster had announced, on the first night of term, was forbidden to all students. The boy had not gone into the corridor. The boy had not needed to. The ring had, on the 2nd night of term, mapped the floor through the bricks in a kind of magnetic resonance scan, and the boy had known, since week 1, that there was a large 3-headed dog inside the locked door, and that beyond the dog was a small stone shaft, and that below the shaft was a series of chambers, and that at the end of the chambers was a small artifact whose nature the ring had not, by its scan, been able to fully resolve. He knew now what the artifact was. The ring had, 2 weeks ago, found a reference in Hermione's library copy of a tome called Magical Substances of the Last Millennium. the Philosopher's Stone, Nicola's Flamel. 6 centuries old, granted immortality to the holder. Granted, additionally, an elixir that could, with the right preparation, restore a body to a wraith. Voldemort wanted the stone. The stone was what was waiting for him at the end of the chambers. Quirrell had gone down to fetch it. The boy, Ron, and Hermione arrived at the forbidden corridor. The door was, contrary to its usual state, unlocked. The boy paused at the door. He looked at the ring on his hand. The ring was warm. The ring had been warm for 3 months, since the boy had set foot in this castle, but the ring was, now, warmer than it had ever been. The ring was, the boy understood, without having to be told, preparing. He turned to Ron and Hermione. "I think I want to tell you something," he said. "Both of you." "Now," said Ron, who had not yet quite caught up. "Yes, now, before we go in." He pulled back the cuff of his right sleeve. The small green ring on the middle finger of his right hand was visible for the first time in any kind of light. Hermione, who had been reading every textbook in the library since September, looked at it for 1 full second and said, in a small electric voice, "That isn't magical. What is it? It's a long story. The short version is that I have, for the last 5 years, been training as a member of an intergalactic police force, and the ring is the badge of office, and the ring is going to help me contain Voldemort. Tonight, in the chamber at the end of this corridor. You can come or not." "Intergalactic," said Ron Weasley. "Yes, police. Yes, Harry. Yes, that's amazing." "Yes," said the boy. "It is. I'll explain after." Hermione was already past him, opening the door. The 3-headed dog on the other side of the door was asleep. The boy, with a small green construct, picked the dog up and set it aside. The dog snored. The boy lowered the trapdoor's lid and dropped, with a small green construct of a parachute, into the chamber. Ron and Hermione followed, on small green platforms the boy made for them, which surprised them so much that Ron forgot to scream. The chambers passed in a series of small, unimpressive challenges that the ring solved, one after another in under a minute each. Devil's Snare, a small green pruning. Flying Keys, a small green net. Giant Chess, a small green sweep of all the relevant black pieces off the board, which was almost cheating, but was not, by the ring's strict reading of the local rules, technically prohibited. Logic Potions, the ring read the riddle, computed the answer, and the boy drank the right potion. Hermione, watching all this happen in slightly under 2 minutes, said, in a very small voice, "Harry, the ring is wonderful. Yes, I'd like to talk to it. Later. Yes. After we deal with Voldemort, yes." They reached the final chamber. Quirrell was there. Quirrell was standing in front of a tall mirror, the Mirror of Arist, the ring identified, an old Hogwarts artifact about which Dumbledore had been entirely too sentimental, and Quirrell was, by every indication, frustrated. The turban was off. The back of Quirrell's head was, the boy saw clinically, not Quirrell's head. It was a face. A red-eyed, snake-nosed, white-skinned face. It was Voldemort. It was, the ring confirmed in a tight, quiet voice, the wraith of Tom Riddle. Quirrell turned. He saw the boy. He smiled. "Potter," said Quirrell in his real voice, which was not the stammering voice he used in class, but a low, smooth, contemptuous voice. "How interesting. He said you might come." "Hello, Professor," said the boy politely. "Hello, Tom." The face on the back of Quirrell's head hissed. "Boy, I'd like to talk. You will hand me the stone, boy, or you and your friends." "Tom," said the boy, "I'm sorry to interrupt. I would really like to talk. Could we have 1 minute? Then if the talking doesn't go the way I'd like, we can do the other thing." Voldemort's face on the back of Quirrell's head went very still. "Boy," it said, "what are you wearing?" "A ring." "What kind of ring?" The boy held up his right hand. The cuff was already back. The small green band on his middle finger was, in the dim light of the chamber, very bright. He said quietly, in the warm voice he had been waiting 6 years to say it in, "In brightest day, in blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. Let those who worship evil's might beware my power, Green Lantern's light." The chamber filled with green. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit it was, the ring would later note, the cleanest containment it had ever seen executed by a lantern of any age. The boy, with no hesitation, no wasted motion, no flourish, built in approximately 110 milliseconds, a perfect spherical containment cage, 3 feet in diameter, centered on Professor Quirrell's head. The cage was, by the ring's read, about 36 layers thick. Each layer was a different waveform. The waveforms were, lanterns called this a Salok weave, designed to interfere with each other, so that any attempt to escape through one waveform would be reflected by the next. The cage was anchored to the ring on Harry's hand, and the ring was anchored to Harry's heartbeat, which was, at this moment, extraordinarily steady. The cage hummed. The wraith on the back of Quirrell's head, which had been about to speak, found that it could not speak. The wraith found that it could not move. The Wraith found that the connection it had maintained to Quirrell's body, through which it had been living for the last several months, was, by the cage's careful and precise pressure, being severed. Quirrell screamed briefly and slumped. The boy with a second construct caught him. The Wraith, separated from Quirrell's body, hung inside the cage in a kind of black smoke that the boy did not at age 11 particularly want to look at. "Voldemort," said the boy quietly, "you are detained. You will be processed. You have, by my read, committed a number of crimes that fall under the Lantern Code's universal jurisdiction. Murder, attempted murder of a 6-year-old. The deliberate fragmentation of your own soul, which, by the way, we are going to talk about. You are entitled to a hearing. You will receive one. You will not, however, be conducting it on this planet." The Wraith hissed. The Wraith could not, with any of its faculties, do anything else. The boy looked at Ron and Hermione. Both were staring at him. Both were, by his read, in a state somewhere between awe and existential crisis. The boy thought he would need to talk to them in detail in the morning. He would. He turned back to the cage. "Ring," he said, "we're going to need an extraction. Will you contact whoever needs to be contacted?" "Already done, Harry." "Then, they are coming. 2 minutes. Then we wait." They waited, Quirrell on the floor, breathed shallowly. He would survive. The boy had been careful. The Wraith in the cage would not. The Wraith would in 2 minutes be transported, by means the boy did not exactly understand, and the ring would explain to him on the way home, to a holding facility in another universe, where it would face a tribunal of 9 very old beings who had been waiting for it for a long time. The boy sat down on a small green stool. He put his elbows on his knees. He put his face in his hands. Hermione, after a long moment, sat down next to him on a stool the boy had made for her, and after another long moment, very gently, put her arm around his shoulders. Ron, after another long moment, sat down on the other side and very gently put his arm around the boy's other shoulders. The boy, after a longer moment, began to shake. He had not, in any of his 5 years of training, in any of his 9 months of careful planning in the cupboard, in any of the long conversations with Hal Jordan on the salt flats, let himself think about what this would feel like. He had not let himself think about it because he had, in the back of his mind, suspected that thinking about it would be too big. He had been right. It was too big. He was 11 years old. He had just bound the wraith of the man who had killed his parents in a 36-layer Salak cage in a stone chamber under a castle in Scotland, and his 2 friends, who he had known for 2 months and 3 weeks and 4 days respectively, were sitting on either side of him with their arms around him, and the green light of the cage was reflecting off the wet flagstones of the floor, and he could not, for a moment, stop shaking. After about a minute, he stopped. He looked at Ron. He looked at Hermione. He said in a voice that did not, in spite of his best efforts, entirely steady, "Thank you for coming with me." "Anytime, mate," said Ron Weasley. "Always," said Hermione Granger. 2 minutes later in the chamber, a small green portal opened, and 2 large green-clad shapes stepped through it. One was a lantern from a planet called Bolivax Vic who had 4 red eyes and a kindly grin, and whose name was Kilowog. The other was a small bird-headed scholar from Zudar called Tomari. The boy stood up. The boy saluted. Kilowog returned the salute. Then Kilowog very gently walked over to the boy, who was 11 and small and very tired, and put one enormous green hand on the boy's head and said, "Poozer," he said, "you did good." The boy started to cry. Kilowog let him. Tomari, with brisk, efficient hands, dealt with the cage and the wraith. 3 minutes later they were gone, with the wraith, through the green portal, back to Oa. The boy stayed. Hermione and Ron stayed too. They sat on the flagstones for a long time. Eventually they went upstairs and got Quirrell to the hospital wing, and told a very confused Madame Pomfrey that Professor Quirrell had found him. They had found him on the 3rd floor. They were not sure why he had been there. And Madame Pomfrey, who was a sensible woman and who could see that 3 students were lying to her, but who could also see that the students were not lying to her about anything that was, in the long term, important, sent them to bed. The boy slept 12 hours. When he woke, the ring was warm, and the dormitory was full of sunlight, and Ron Weasley, in the 4-poster across the room, was watching him with a kind of patient wonder, and Hermione Granger somehow was at the foot of the bed in defiance of every Hogwarts rule about girls in the boys' dormitory, and she was reading a book about, the boy noted with great interest, the history of the Lantern Corps, which she could not, by any reasonable mechanism, have got hold of in the last 8 hours. But which the ring on the boy's hand had, at the boy's clear instruction, very quietly built for her in green construct ink overnight on a stack of his spare parchment. The boy smiled, very small. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning, Harry," said Hermione without looking up. "Good morning, Harry," said Ron. "Are we late for breakfast?" "You are very late for breakfast," said Hermione, "but we saved you a great deal of bacon." "Thank you," said the boy. He got up. He went to breakfast. He ate bacon. The wraith of Tom Riddle was, at that moment, sitting in a small green holding cell in a tower on Oa, being looked at, with patience and considerable curiosity, by 9 very old beings. The boy did not know what was happening on Oa. The boy would, in time, find out. For now, the boy ate bacon. For now, the boy was 11. For now, the school was warm, and the bacon was good, and his 2 friends were on either side of him, and the small green ring on his middle finger was, for the first time since he had received it, very quietly humming with something that, the boy thought, sounded a little like pride. Diamond Suit, Diamond Suit, Diamond Suit. Chapter 5. The Diary, the Dog, and the Sworn Testimony. The boy had a long, careful conversation with Albus Dumbledore on the day after the containment of Voldemort. The conversation took place in the headmaster's office, behind a gargoyle that the headmaster had set to a password the boy was not, on his first visit, told. The conversation went on for nearly 3 hours. By its end, the headmaster knew about the ring, about Hal Jordan, about the core, about the dreamscape, about the fortress at Privet Drive, about the cupboard, about the 5 years of training, and about the boy's view, expressed politely but firmly, that the wraith of Tom Riddle was not, in fact, going to be returning, because the wraith of Tom Riddle was, in fact, currently in a small green holding cell on a planet called Oa, awaiting a tribunal whose schedule the boy was not privy to, but the existence of which the boy had been assured. Dumbledore listened. Dumbledore looked, more than once, at the small green ring on the boy's middle finger. Dumbledore looked at the small Green Lantern uniform the ring had constructed around the boy's shoulders for the occasion of the meeting, which the ring had thought, on balance, was a more honest costume for the conversation than the school robes. Dumbledore, at the end of the conversation, said, "Mr. Potter, I owe you an apology." "You don't, Headmaster." "I do. I made a number of decisions when you were a baby and again when you were a child that I made because I believed I had no better alternative. I left you with your aunt. I left you with very little. I left you, for 10 years, in conditions that I tolerated because I had told myself that they would protect you. I had not anticipated the ring. I had not anticipated the core. I had not anticipated, in particular, you. I am sorry." The boy considered this slowly. The boy had thought a great deal in the cupboard in the small bedroom on the train about what he wanted eventually to say to Albus Dumbledore. He had not in the end planned the speech. He had decided that he was going to listen first. "Headmaster," the boy said, "I accept the apology. I would like to say, I think, that I am not angry with you about the cupboard, because I am not sure that being angry would do me any good. I am concerned about the cupboard. I am concerned about the next set of decisions. I would like to make them with you, if that's all right." Dumbledore looked at the boy for a long moment. "That is a fair request, Mr. Potter. I will try. Thank you." "And the wraith on Oa." "Yes, there is in this world a complication I have not discussed with you. The Horcruxes," said the boy. Dumbledore was for a fraction of a second surprised. Then he laughed. It was, the boy thought, a real laugh. "Yes, Mr. Potter, the Horcruxes. The ring has been doing some scanning. The ring estimates 7 fragments. One in me, the scar, which the ring has, with my permission, isolated and is currently containing. One that we've already taken to Oa in the wraith itself. 5 others somewhere. The ring is actively searching." Dumbledore stared at him. "Mr. Potter. Headmaster, you are extraordinary. I have an extraordinary friend. That's not the same. Permit me, Mr. Potter, to disagree. The friend is extraordinary. The lantern is extraordinary. The boy beneath both is the most extraordinary of all." The boy looked down at his hands. "Thank you, Headmaster." There was a silence. Then Dumbledore, who had, in the last 3 hours, recalibrated more of his strategic plan than he had recalibrated in any previous 3 hours of his very long life, said quietly, "Mr. Potter. The other 5 Horcruxes. May I assist, please? I have certain guesses, certain leads, certain old conversations of Tom S. that I have been retracing in my memory for some years now. I will share all of them with you, with the ring, with your friends if you wish them included. I wish them included, sir. Then I will draw up a list. We will discuss it. We will together find them, and we will deliver them one by one to your colleagues on the planet Oa. Will you, Mr. Potter, allow me that partnership?" The boy considered. "Yes, Headmaster. Thank you, Headmaster. Yes, there is also the matter of Sirius Black." Dumbledore's expression did not change. The boy noted this. The boy understood, with the careful attention of a boy who had been reading adults' faces since he was very small, that he had reached a topic about which the headmaster was, somewhere along the line, going to have to do some difficult thinking. "What about Sirius Black, Mr. Potter?" "The ring has been reviewing the records, sir. The ring and I have come to a conclusion. The conclusion is that Sirius Black, my godfather, is innocent. He did not betray my parents." He did not kill Peter Pettigrew. He has been in Azkaban for 10 years for 2 crimes he did not commit. Dumbledore was very still. Mr. Potter, he said carefully, that is a significant claim. Yes, you can prove it. I can prove it, sir. The ring can prove it. There is among the powers of the ring a power called sworn testimony. Any being who places their hand on the ring may give testimony about events they know to have happened, and the ring will display the testimony as a recording, visible, audible, witnessable to all present. The testimony is, and this is the important part, verifiable as true. The ring does not produce a recording if the testimony is false. There is a green flag, sir. It comes up when the testimony is true. The Lantern Corps, in their own civil jurisprudence, treats the green flag as conclusive evidence. Dumbledore considered this. Mr. Potter, that is, by the standards of our Wisengamot, irregular. Yes, it is also, by the standards of our Wisengamot, admissible. There is in our codes a provision for testimony delivered under self-evidencing oath. The provision has been little used in 2 centuries. It applies. I will make the case. I will speak to Madam Bones. Thank you, sir. And when shall we do this? As soon as we can locate Sirius. Mr. Potter, Sirius is in Azkaban. Sirius is no longer in Azkaban, sir. I beg your pardon. Sirius is currently in a small woodland in southern France, sir. He escaped 17 days ago. He has not been recaptured, although the Ministry has, by my read, not yet noticed. Dumbledore stared at him for a long moment. Then he sighed very softly in the way of an old man who has just been informed that the world is, on several axes at once, more complicated than he had hoped. Mr. Potter, he said. Yes, sir, you have been busy. I have, sir. Get Sirius to my office, Mr. Potter, quietly. I will arrange for Madam Bones to be present, and for 3 Aurors. Trusted ones, we will do this Wisengamot procedure, sworn testimony. We will, by the end of the week, have your godfather a free man. Thank you, headmaster, and Mr. Potter, sir. The man Pettigrew, the man who betrayed your parents, yes, is also in southern France. He is in southern Wiltshire, sir. He is, at this moment, in his rat form, in the kitchen pantry of an aging widow in Tilshead, where he has been hiding for 9 years and 3 months. The ring is tracking him. Mr. Potter, sir. Dumbledore looked at the boy. Dumbledore, who had once, 80 years ago, been a boy himself, although the boy he had been was a different kind of boy than the one in front of him, felt a kind of distant ache, the kind a teacher feels when a student has turned in an essay that suggests the student is going to surpass the teacher in the proper time by a considerable margin. Bring me Pettigrew also, Mr. Potter, said Dumbledore. In whatever form, we will deal with him at the same time. Yes, sir. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. It was, on balance, the easiest term of school the boy ever had. There was no Voldemort. There was no wraith on the back of a teacher's head. There was instead school, the small steady grind of learning charms and transfiguration and potions and defense against the dark arts, which, by the 2nd week of Quirrell's recovery, was taught by an emergency substitute who knew nothing about anything but who was, by long Hogwarts tradition, not exactly required to. There was Ron Weasley, who had, in the days after the chamber, listened to Harry's full explanation of the Corps for about 3 hours, and had then sat very quietly for about 10 minutes and had then said, in a small, honest voice, Mate, I think I'd very much like to be your friend, for a long time. Is that all right? There was Hermione, who, after reading the Green Construct book in 2 nights and writing a small list of follow-up questions in the back of her notebook, had asked the ring if she could, in exchange for the privilege of being friends with the boy, be allowed to occasionally help, and the ring, which had been studying Hermione's mind with extreme interest since the 2nd week of term, had said yes. There was Hagrid, who had been told some, but not all, of what had happened on the 3rd floor, and who had cried on hearing what he was told, and who had hugged the boy so hard the boy's spine had briefly considered changing its policies. There was in time Sirius Black, a thin pale man in his 30s who had been brought to the headmaster's office on the 2nd Sunday of December under a particularly clever joint operation involving the ring, a small green portkey, the boy, Hermione, a borrowed broom Ron had loaned them, and a night bus driver who had been paid to be elsewhere. There was the Wisengamot session, which lasted 90 minutes, at the end of which Sirius Black, who had not had a kind look from any official in 12 years, had received an official apology from the acting chief warlock and a small purse of 2,000 galleons in restitution, at the end of which the boy had spent his first night with his godfather over a small pub dinner in Hogsmeade, listening to Sirius tell stories about his father in a voice that wobbled in and out of laughter, and saying very little. And trying, quietly, without fanfare, not to cry into his shepherd's pie, there was Peter Pettigrew. The man Peter Pettigrew had, in the 4 days before the Wisengamot session, been brought from his hidey hole in Wiltshire by the boy and a small green portkey to a ministry holding cell. He had been processed. He had been put on trial 4 days after Sirius's exoneration. He had been, by the testimony of every adult who had known him before his disappearance, including Sirius, including Remus Lupin, who had returned from a long, quiet decade in a small Yorkshire village to give evidence, convicted of betrayal of the Potters, of complicity in their murder, of the murder of 12 muggles in a London street on the day Sirius had been arrested, and of evading lawful imprisonment for a period of 10 years. He had been sentenced to a long term in Azkaban. The boy had not been present at the sentencing. The boy had, by his own private election, chosen to spend the morning of the sentencing taking a long walk by the Black Lake with Ron and Hermione, and not thinking about Peter Pettigrew at all. There was, on the way home for Christmas, a small thing. The boy was, by Dumbledore's quiet arrangement, not going home to Privet Drive. The boy was, for the first time in his life, going home to a house his own family had owned, which Sirius had inherited from Sirius's family, and had given without ceremony to Harry, a small old house in a North London square called Grimmauld Place that smelled of dust and old books, and that had, on the boy's first night in it, no working hot water. The boy did not care about the hot water. The boy did, however, on the second day of his stay, accept Sirius's offer to spend the holiday at Sirius's other property, a small cottage on a Devon cliff that Sirius had not lived in for 15 years, but that Sirius, on the morning after his exoneration, had cleaned with his own wand, by his own hand, in 5 hours of careful labor. The boy spent Christmas there. The boy spent it with Sirius, who had taught the boy how to cook a roast and had laughed for the first time the boy had ever seen, and with Remus Lupin, who had told him gently, quietly, in 3 sessions of 10 minutes each, about his mother and father, and who had cried, and who had been embraced, and who had been thanked, and who had on the third night sat on the back porch of the cottage with the boy and looked out at the sea and said, very softly in a voice that was not quite asking, "Harry, the ring." May I see it?" The boy held out his hand. The ring glowed very faintly in the dark. "What does it feel like?" Remus said. Like a good friend, sir. The kind that says yes to things you want to do and no to things you shouldn't do, and the no is always, always polite. And it has taught you. It has taught me a great deal, sir. And Sirius tells me there are others like the ring, other rings, other lanterns. Yes, sir, many of them. I haven't met them in person, of course, but in the dreamscape, yes, I know them well. Will you meet them someday, in person? The boy thought about this. I think I will, sir, someday. You'll have to go a long way. I will, sir. Hal Jordan would say it's a small distance when you have a ring. Hal Jordan, Remus paused. The man who made the ring. Yes, Harry. May I ask you something? Yes, sir. Do you think of him as a sort of father? The boy looked at the dark sea. Yes, sir. Is that all right with your real father? I think so, sir. My real father isn't here. Hal isn't here either, really. He's a memory. He's a recording in the ring. But the recording has been kind to me. The recording has sat across the table from me. The recording has knelt down in front of me and put his hands on my shoulders. And I think they would have liked each other, sir. James and Hal. I think they would have been friends. Remus Lupin, who had not in 11 years had a long, honest conversation with anybody, was for a moment unable to answer. He looked at the sea. He looked at the boy. He put his hand very lightly on the boy's shoulder. I think so too, Harry, he said. I think they would have been very good friends. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. Second year began. Second year began with a house elf in the small bedroom at Grimmauld Place that the boy had taken for himself, with a small panicked house elf called Dobby, who had, by his own confession, tried for several weeks to prevent the boy from returning to Hogwarts on the grounds that there was a great danger waiting for him there, with the boy, who listened to Dobby for an hour and then asked the ring to scan Dobby, and the ring confirmed that Dobby was telling the truth, although Dobby was on a separate axis. Also a deeply unwell house elf in need of about 6 months of careful kindness, with the boy, who offered Dobby a position in his household as soon as he had a household, which, the boy noted, he now technically did, since Grimmauld Place was his, and which Dobby accepted with such hysterical sobs that the boy spent the next 20 minutes patting him on the head with great patience. Second year began with a danger then. Dobby had been right. Lucius Malfoy, the boy in the ring, agreed on this. On the night of the second day of school, after about an hour of cross-checking, had placed an object in Hogwarts. The object was, by the ring's read, a Horcrux. The Horcrux was, by the ring's narrower scan, a diary. The boy did not need to find the diary. The diary was in the possession of Ginny Weasley, an 11-year-old first-year who was Ron's sister, who had spent the summer working herself up into a kind of small, adoring hero worship of the boy, after he had visited the burrow in August and had been polite to her over breakfast, and who had been on the second day of school, scanned by the ring on a casual ambient sweep that the ring conducted as it walked the boy down the corridor, and had pinged with the small, unmistakable signal of soul fragment. The boy that night in the dormitory talked it through with the ring. "It's in her bag," the boy said. "It is. She doesn't know. She does not. It will use her. Eventually, the way it used Quirrell. It will. How long do we have? At its current rate, a month before significant cognitive feedback, 2 before takeover, 3 before the takeover is irreversible, and the simplest fix, Harry, is to ask Ginny for the diary." All right. The next morning at breakfast, the boy got up from the Gryffindor table at the end of the meal and walked with quiet deliberateness to where Ginny Weasley was sitting and said, "Good morning, Ginny." Ginny looked up. Ginny, who had spent the first day of school in a state of nervous anticipation about whether the famous Harry Potter would actually speak to her this term, was for the moment speechless. "Good morning, Harry. May I sit?" "Yes." The boy sat. The boy considered, for one full second, the various ways this conversation could go. He chose the kindest. "Ginny," he said, "I would like to ask you a favor. I have noticed, and I will explain why I have noticed in a moment, that you have in your bag an old book, a black diary, with a name on the inside cover, Tom Riddle." Ginny's face, the boy noted, went still in a way that was not, by any normal measure, her face. "It isn't yours, is it?" the boy said. "It was given to you." "Yes, by Mr. Malfoy, at Flourish and Blots. He put it into your cauldron when no one was looking." How did you?" "I'm sorry, Ginny, I will explain everything in a moment. May I have the diary? I know that this is a strange thing to ask. I know you don't know me well. However, I am almost certain that the diary is hurting you. I would like to make it stop." Ginny Weasley looked at the boy across from her. Ginny Weasley was 11. Ginny Weasley had grown up in a house where she was the youngest of 7 and where she had often been not listened to, and Ginny Weasley had not, by any reckoning of her short life so far, ever heard the words "I would like to make it stop" spoken to her in a voice as level and as undemanding and as immediately trustworthy as the voice the boy had just used. She reached into her bag. She took out the diary. She put it on the table between them. She slid it across. "Thank you, Ginny," the boy said. He did not pick the diary up with his hand. He picked it up with a small green construct which he had built in the second before he reached for it, and which Ginny did not see, although Hermione, who had been watching from the other end of the table, saw and made a small approving note. "Ginny," the boy said, "will you come with me after class? I want to introduce you to someone. He's going to want to scan you very briefly and make sure the diary hasn't left anything in you. After that, I'll buy you a butter beer, and I'll explain everything." "Is that all right?" Ginny Weasley, who had received in her life a number of things she had not asked for, was, for the first time in any of those occasions, being told she was about to be taken care of. "Yes," she said quietly. "All right." She was, by the end of the week, in Harry's small circle of trust, which had grown, the boy noted with quiet amusement, by approximately one trusted person every 2 months since September. She was also, by the end of the week, no longer carrying any soul fragment of Tom Riddle in her conscious mind, which the ring confirmed in 2 thorough scans. The diary itself had been placed, by the boy, with Dumbledore's permission, in the headmaster's office, inside a containment construct of considerably greater complexity than the cage on Quirrell, and was awaiting collection by a lantern courier the following Friday. The headmaster, when the boy had handed it to him on Tuesday morning, had taken it carefully in both hands and had looked at it for a long moment. "Tom," he had said softly. "Yes, sir. You used to be such a quiet boy, Tom. I used to wonder what you were going to become. He became something the ring is going to take to Oa, sir." Yes, Mr. Potter. That is exactly what he became. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. Third year was largely uneventful. There was a small adventure with a boggart in a defense against the dark arts class taught, this year, by Remus Lupin, whom the boy had recommended, after a careful private conversation with Dumbledore in which the question of Remus's lycanthropy had been raised and dealt with, both serious and the boy had vouched, and the boy had built a small set of constructed safeguards for the night of the full moon, which Remus had accepted with tears in his eyes. There was a Quidditch season in which the boy did not play, because the boy's relationship to flying had been complicated in a way that no one in the school except Hermione and Ron quite understood. There was a Hogsmeade weekend on which Sirius, newly free, newly a citizen, newly the owner of a small property on the high street, had made the boy and his friends tea in his small bachelor's kitchen, and had told them stories about James Potter at age 16 until they were all weeping with laughter. There was, in late spring, an an incident with the Whomping Willow that did not, this term, become a crisis. Because Sirius was at home, because Pettigrew was in Azkaban, because Lupin had no reason to chase anything onto the grounds, and because the boy, who had been keeping a quiet eye on his godfather and his godfather's friends and his own father's old map, which he had taken, with permission, from Filch's office in late January after deciding it was, in fact, a family heirloom, did not have any particular reason to spend a night running through the corridors after invisible criminals. He spent the spring instead with the diary safely off the planet, with the Wraith of Voldemort safely off the planet, with 2 Horcruxes accounted for and 5 more on the long list Dumbledore was, in his own quiet way, helping to compile. He spent the spring with Hermione, who had begun, in February, to study the ring's structure in earnest. She had developed, by the end of March, a small workable theory about the difference between wand magic and will magic that was, the ring assured her, going to get her into a postdoctoral seminar at Oa University eventually if she wanted one. He spent the spring with Ron, whose flying was getting very good, and who had been chosen as the Gryffindor team's reserve keeper for next season, and whose mother had, at Christmas, made the boy a sweater the same as her son's sweaters with a small green H on the chest, and the boy had cried on receiving it and had not been able to explain to Mrs. Weasley quite why. He spent the spring with Sirius, who had taken to coming up to the school every other Saturday and taking Harry to lunch in Hogsmeade, and who had, by the end of the year, gradually transformed from the thin, haunted man who had been delivered to Dumbledore's office in December into a man with, the boy noticed, color in his face and a real laugh, and a small embarrassing habit of buying Harry a new gift every Saturday, and pretending he had bought it for himself and accidentally overordered. He spent the spring with Hagrid, with Lupin, with Dobby, who had come to live full-time at Grimmauld Place in February, and who was now slowly learning, with the boy's careful patience, that he was allowed to make decisions for himself, with McGonagall, who had begun in March, to invite him to tea on Wednesday afternoons alone, and to ask him questions about constructs that nobody but a teacher of considerable seriousness would have known to ask, and perhaps most importantly, with the ring. The ring was, by the end of the year, almost a full member of the household. The ring in the cupboard had been a friend, the ring in the small bedroom at Privet Drive had been a tutor, the ring at Hogwarts had been a partner, the ring, by the end of third year, had become something else, something that the boy did not at 13 quite have a word for, but that he recognized when on the last day of term he sat with the ring in the courtyard of Hogwarts looking out at the lake and said, "Ring, yes, Harry, would you call us a family?" The ring took a moment to answer. "Yes, Harry," it said, "I would call us a family." The boy nodded. He looked at the lake. He looked at the ring on his hand. He looked at the small green sigil on his chest, where the lantern symbol was these days, sometimes openly displayed. On the days he chose to wear his uniform rather than his school robes, Dumbledore had in March ruled that the boy was, by Hogwarts' own bylaws, entitled to wear the uniform of any external organization to which he belonged, and the boy had taken Dumbledore at his word. Then ring. "Yes, Harry, I am very glad I have a family." "So am I, Harry." The boy did not say anything else. The ring did not either. They sat in the courtyard, looking out at the lake until the sun set, and then the boy got up and went down to the train. He went home to Sirius's house. He spent his summer with his godfather, in the small old house in North London that he had begun, very slowly, to think of as home. He went twice to visit Mrs. Weasley at the Burrow. He went once to visit Hermione's parents at their small house in Hampstead, and to be told by Hermione's father over dinner that Hermione had explained to them about the ring and that they were, the father said carefully, extremely proud of her and extremely glad she had met him, and that he and Mrs. Granger would, going forward, very much like to consider him a member of the Granger family if that was acceptable to the boy, and the boy had, to his enormous surprise, said yes, of course. Thank you, and had cried into his sleeve at the Hampstead table, while Mrs. Granger pretended not to see, and Hermione's father very gently passed him another slice of bread. He did not go to Privet Drive. He never went to Privet Drive again. He did in late August write a letter to Aunt Petunia. The letter was short. The letter said, "Aunt Petunia, I am well. I am at school. I hope you and Uncle Vernon and Dudley are well also. If you ever need to reach me, you may write to me at the school. I do not blame you for the cupboard. I do not also miss it. With love, Harry." The letter was, by the ring's count, the third draft. The first draft had been 4 pages and had been honest in a way that the boy had decided on rereading was not the kind of honest he wanted to be at 13. The second draft had been shorter and had said too little. The third draft had said exactly what the boy had decided to say. Aunt Petunia did not write back. The boy did not, for the rest of his life, mind. He had by then plenty of other people to write to. The Wisengamot session that freed Sirius Black is worth, in retrospect, a slightly closer look. The boy had not, before December of his first year, ever entered the Ministry of Magic. He had been told about it in passing, by Hagrid, by Sirius, by Dumbledore, but he had not, before that morning, set foot in the lifts of the atrium or stepped onto the dark marble of the Wisengamot chamber. He went on the morning of the second Sunday of December, in a small gray suit that Sirius had bought him on the Friday and had altered overnight by a Hogsmeade tailor who owed Sirius a favor. The boy was, by his own measure, 11 years old and slightly out of his depth. The boy did not, by the ring's own observation, look it. The boy was met at the atrium by Madame Amelia Bones, who was the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and a tall, stout woman in plum robes who had been a friend of his mother, S. Madame Bones, on seeing the boy, did not extend her hand. Madame Bones, instead, walked over to him and looked at him for one full second and said, "Lily's boy." "Yes, Madame Bones, you have her chin. I thank you, come with me." The boy went with her. Sirius, who was being conducted from a different entrance under the careful escort of 2 Aurors and Albus Dumbledore in person, would arrive at the chamber 10 minutes later. The boy was, in the intervening 10 minutes, walked through the procedure by Madame Bones. The procedure was, in essence, this. The Wisengamot, sitting as a court of inquiry, which was the standard form for hearings of this kind, would be presented with the case. Sirius would be present, in formal custody, in the dock at the floor of the chamber. The court would ask Sirius certain questions. Sirius would answer. The court would then, by Madame Bones's careful negotiation with the acting chief warlock over the preceding week, accept Harry's testimony, which was, by Wisengamot procedure, irregular for an 11-year-old but not technically prohibited, under the self-evidencing oath provision Dumbledore had identified. "What will the testimony look like?" the boy asked in the corridor. "It will look, Mr. Potter, like whatever your ring shows the court. I have read Dumbledore's brief. I have been told what to expect. I will, on my part, vouch for the procedure to the acting chief warlock. I cannot, however, vouch for what the ring will show. That is, between you, your ring, and the truth." "All right, Mr. Potter. Yes, Madame Bones. You are 11. I am, ma'am. You are about to do something that no 11-year-old in the history of the Wisengamot has ever done. All right, ma'am. Try not to be afraid." "I will not, ma'am, be afraid. I am quite practiced." Madame Bones looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Potter, yes, I see why she left you with us. She did not explain who she did not need to," the boy understood. Lily Potter, in the careful arrangements she had made before her death, had left a number of letters and provisions, which the boy had only learned the full details of over the previous month. One of the letters had been to Madame Bones. The boy did not know what it had said. He guessed in the corridor that morning that it had said something on the order of, "Please look out for him." He nodded. The Wisengamot chamber was large and circular and shaped like an old surgical theater. The judges sat in tiered seats along the walls. The acting chief warlock, a thin gray man whose name the boy did not catch on first introduction, sat at the top of the chamber. Sirius was led in. Sirius was thin, was pale, was dressed in a clean robe Dumbledore had brought from somewhere. Sirius's hair had been cut by Sirius himself 2 days before. Sirius looked at the boy across the chamber as Sirius was led to the dock, and Sirius's face, which had been blank, became, for one private moment, a real face. The boy in his small gray suit raised a hand in greeting. Sirius nodded. The hearing began. The acting chief warlock read the charges. The acting chief warlock invited Sirius to enter his plea. Sirius, in a clear, unwavering voice, said, "Not guilty on all counts." The acting chief warlock then invited the testimony. Madame Bones rose and explained the procedural framework. The acting chief warlock asked, with some skepticism, whether the witness was, in fact, a child. Madame Bones confirmed. The acting chief warlock asked whether the procedure had been examined by counsel. Madame Bones confirmed. The acting chief warlock asked whether Dumbledore was present and would vouch. Dumbledore, on the side gallery, rose and said, "I am and I do." The acting chief warlock asked the boy to approach the witness stand. The boy approached. The acting chief warlock asked the boy to state his name and age. The boy did. Harry James Potter, 11 years old. The acting chief warlock asked the boy whether he understood the gravity of giving testimony before this body. "I do, sir." The acting chief warlock asked the boy whether he was prepared to swear, by the self-evidencing oath provision of the Wisengamot Code, that the testimony he was about to give would be the truth. "I am, sir." The acting chief warlock invited him to proceed. The boy raised his right hand. He pulled back the cuff of his small gray suit. The small green ring on his middle finger came into view. The chamber, which had been murmuring, fell completely silent. The boy said, quietly, in the voice the ring had been preparing him for the previous 3 weeks. Ring. Please display in full the events of the night of October 31st, 1981, at and near the property known as the Potter Cottage in Godric's Hollow. The chamber filled with green. The ring built in 3 dimensions in the center of the chamber, in a kind of large floating hologram that every member of the Wisengamot could see from their seats. A faithful, time-correct, sound-included, place-located reconstruction of the night in question. The reconstruction had been built from a number of sources. The boy's own returned memories, which the ring had carefully retrieved from the fragment of soul lodged in his scar before isolating it, the recollections of Sirius, which the ring had taken under sworn consent in the headmaster's office the previous Wednesday, the cross-referenced testimony of 3 local Muggle witnesses, whose memories the boy had asked the ring to retrieve under a sealed scan that took 5 seconds, and the ring's own logical reconstruction of details where the 4 sources disagreed, which were. In this particular case, almost none. The Wisengamot watched the reconstruction in silence for 14 minutes. They watched James Potter die. They watched Lily Potter die. They watched Tom Riddle attempt to kill an infant Harry. They watched Tom Riddle fail. They watched the killing curse rebound. They watched the cottage collapse. They watched, in the small intervening time, Sirius Black arrive on a flying motorcycle. They watched Sirius hand the infant Harry to Rubeus Hagrid. They watched Sirius depart in pursuit of Peter Pettigrew. They watched Sirius confront Pettigrew the next morning in a London street. They watched Pettigrew shout an accusation, kill 12 Muggles with a single blasting curse, transform into a rat, and flee. They watched Sirius, bewildered, devastated, looking exactly like a man who has just learned that his best friend has been killed by their other best friend, laugh, in the way the broken sometimes laugh, on the cobblestones of the street until the Aurors arrived. They watched the Aurors arrest him without asking questions. The reconstruction ended. The chamber was silent. The acting chief warlock looked at the boy. The acting chief warlock then looked at the green flag the ring had displayed at the bottom of the hologram, which had remained, for the entire 14 minutes, bright and steady. The acting chief warlock looked at Madame Bones. The acting chief warlock looked at Albus Dumbledore. The acting chief warlock cleared his throat and said, in the clear, unhurried voice of a man who had taken about 30 seconds to make a decision he was going to be quietly proud of for the rest of his life, this court finds the defendant, Sirius Orion Black, not guilty on all charges, by reason of false accusation. This court further finds, on the strength of the testimony just received, that the actual perpetrator of the murders of James and Lily Potter, by way of his disclosure of their location to Lord Voldemort, was Peter Pettigrew, who is by all available evidence currently alive and at large. This court orders the immediate release of Sirius Black, with full restoration of all rights and properties, and offers, on its own initiative, a formal apology for 10 years and 1 month of unjust imprisonment. This court further orders the immediate dispatch of an Auror detail to recover Peter Pettigrew, on the strength of the location data Mr. Potter has, by his own offer, supplied to Madame Bones. The chamber, after the acting chief warlock had finished, made a low collective sound that was somewhere between a sigh and a gasp. Sirius, in the dock, did not for a moment react. Sirius then sat down. Sirius then put his face in his hands. The Aurors on either side of him, with extraordinary gentleness, helped him stand. The boy walked across the floor of the chamber and stood at the foot of the dock and waited for Sirius to look up. Sirius looked up. Sirius did not at first say anything. Sirius simply opened his arms. The boy walked up the small steps to the dock and let his godfather hug him. It was not by any official record a part of the hearing. It is not by any official record transcribed. It happened anyway. Several members of the Wisengamot, who would not have admitted it, were crying at their benches. The acting chief warlock, who would later, in a memoir he never wrote, describe the hearing as the proudest hour of his career, banged the gavel softly and said, "Court adjourned." Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. The lunch after the hearing was at a small old wizard's pub off Charing Cross Road called the Leaky Cauldron. Sirius, who had not in 11 years eaten a meal that was not prison food or extreme road food, sat at the small back table opposite the boy, and Dumbledore sat at one end, and Madame Bones sat at the other, and Sirius ate the shepherd's pie very slowly, with the careful deliberation of a man who was relearning how to taste. He did not talk much. He looked at the boy a great deal. After about 10 minutes, Sirius said in a small, unfamiliar voice, "Harry, yes, I should have come for you. I should have been with you. I shouldn't have gone after Peter that night. I should have stayed with you. I am sorry." The boy considered this. Sirius, the boy said carefully, I do not think it was your fault that night. You had just lost everything, and you went to do what made sense to you. It made sense, the Aurors should have asked. They didn't, it isn't on you that they didn't. Harry, I am very glad you are here now. I am Harry, I am very, he could not finish, he did not need to. After lunch, Sirius and the boy and Dumbledore went to Sirius's family's old house in Grimmauld Place, which Sirius had not entered in 11 years, and Sirius unlocked the door and stood on the threshold for a long minute and then walked in. Dumbledore stayed in the hall. The boy stayed in the hall. Sirius walked the rooms of the house very slowly by himself for about half an hour. He came back to the hall. He said in a small, unsteady voice, Harry, would you like to come live here with me? When you're between terms, I can make it, I can clean it up. It's not much, but it's my house, and it can be your house too, if you'll have it. The boy looked at his godfather for a long moment. Yes, Sirius, he said. Yes. Sirius, who had not in 14 years asked anybody to live with him, did not for a moment know what to say. He looked at Dumbledore. Albus. Yes, Sirius. I have a son. I had a son this whole, He did not finish that sentence either. Dumbledore did not require him to. Dumbledore, with the small, careful patience of a man who had been waiting for this for several days, simply stepped forward and put one of his old papery hands on Sirius's shoulder and said, You do, Sirius. He's standing right there. Sirius looked at Harry. Harry looked at Sirius. They did not this time hug. They simply looked at each other across the old dust of the hall, and they decided in a small, private, wordless way that the look was enough. They went up to the kitchen. Sirius made tea. The tea was not, in fact, very good tea because the milk was not present in the house and the water was off, but the boy drank it anyway, and so did Sirius, and so did Dumbledore. The boy laughed for the first time in the day at something Sirius said about the house's old portrait of Sirius's mother, which had begun, on hearing them in the hall, to scream a series of obscenities at them, and which Sirius, by the simple expedient of throwing a sheet over it, had silenced. It was, the boy thought, on the train back to Hogwarts that evening, the best day of his life so far. He thought he might have a few more of them now. The ring on his finger agreed. Diamond Suit, Chapter 6, The Triwizard, and the Rat in the Graveyard. The boy entered his 4th year at Hogwarts as a lantern who had stopped hiding. He had not hidden exactly since the night in the chamber. But he had, by careful negotiation with Dumbledore, confined the public use of the ring to a small range of permitted activities: rescue, defense, and demonstration to trusted faculty. He had worn the ring under his robes most days, although it was now widely known among the students that he had a ring, and that the ring did what no wand had ever quite done. He had been the subject of 2 long write-ups in the Daily Prophet, both of which the boy had refused to be interviewed for. He had been the subject of one extremely long photograph spread in Witch Weekly, which Hermione had read with appalled fascination, and Ron with hooting laughter, and the boy with weary patience. He had grown taller. He was, at the start of 4th year, 5'4". He was thin. He had Sirius's barber, who had cut his hair the same shape every 6 weeks since December of 2nd year. He wore, by his own deliberate choice, at Dumbledore's invitation, with the school's blessing, the lantern uniform on the first day of every term instead of his school robes. The uniform fit him perfectly. The uniform was technically a construct. The ring built it fresh every morning he chose to wear it, sized and tailored to his exact dimensions, including the small upgrade to the chest sigil that Hal Jordan in the Dreamscape had personally walked the boy through the design of last spring. The uniform was, the boy thought, the first time he had worn it onto the Hogwarts Express, surprisingly comfortable. He had also, between 3rd and 4th year, made a particular friend. The particular friend was Cedric Diggory. The boy and Cedric had met by chance in May of 3rd year at a Hufflepuff Gryffindor Quidditch match the boy had attended in the stands. The match had been won by Hufflepuff narrowly. Cedric had, after the match, caught up with the boy outside the changing rooms and had said, Potter, hi, I wanted to say I've been wanting to ask. The thing on your finger, may I see it? The boy had liked Cedric's voice. The boy had liked Cedric's face. The boy had liked, in particular, the small, careful courtesy of the request and had held out his hand, and Cedric had looked at the ring for a long moment, and Cedric had said very softly, in a voice no one else had heard, Mate, I have never seen anything like that. You wear that, that is something. And the boy, who had not been called mate by anyone but Ron Weasley, had decided on the spot to like Cedric Diggory. They had become friends over the summer by outpost. They had become better friends in the first month of 4th year, when Cedric, who was 16, who was the captain of the Hufflepuff Quidditch team, who was the kind of boy that every younger student at Hogwarts looked up to in a way that did not quite have a vocabulary, had taken Harry aside in the courtyard one bright September afternoon and had said, "Potter, Harry, I just wanted to you carry a lot. I see you. I have a younger sister. I know what it looks like when somebody is carrying too much. If you ever need to be just a kid, would you let me know?" The boy had not, in any of his life, had a friend who was older than him. The boy, after a long moment, had said yes. They had that autumn gone fishing twice on Sundays on the small river Itchen near Sirius's cottage in Devon, which Sirius had let them use for 2 weekends, and to which Cedric had brought his own father's old fishing tackle. They had caught nothing. They had eaten sandwiches Sirius had made. They had, for the first time in the boy's life, done a small, ordinary thing together, the kind of thing that small, ordinary boys did with small, ordinary friends in the small, ordinary world the boy had not, until that autumn, ever quite been allowed to live in. It was Cedric, in late October, who came up to Harry in the courtyard and said, "Harry, did you hear? The Triwizard, they're bringing it back. There's going to be a tournament, Hogwarts versus Beauxbatons versus Durmstrang. There's going to be 3 champions, 1 per school. There's a goblet. You can't enter, you're too young, you have to be 17, but the school's going to be full of older students. You'll have a great year, lots to watch." The boy, who had been informed of the Triwizard by Dumbledore 8 days earlier, had nodded politely. "I think I'm going to enter," Cedric said. "I think you should," the boy said. "Will you root for me?" "Of course. Will you, if I get in, would you sit in the family box? I'd be honored. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit." The Goblet of Fire spat out Cedric's name on the night of the selection. The Goblet of Fire spat out, also, 2 other names, a Beauxbatons girl called Fleur de Lacquer, who was tall and beautiful and unflappable, and a Durmstrang boy called Victor Crumb, who was the great Bulgarian seeker the boy had read about in the Daily Prophet's sports pages with mild interest. The Goblet of Fire then, to the considerable surprise of everyone in the hall except, perhaps, the boy himself, who had been quietly watching the back of his head all evening and noting the small private hum of his ring, spat out a 4th name, Harry Potter. The boy stood up. The boy walked slowly to the front of the hall. He looked at the goblet. He looked at the fragment of parchment in Dumbledore's hand. He looked at Dumbledore, who looked back at him with an expression the boy had not, in 3 previous years of dealing with Dumbledore, ever quite seen on the man's face. The boy said, quietly, "I did not put my name in, Headmaster." "I know, Mr. Potter," said Dumbledore. "Someone else did. Someone else did, Mr. Potter. I have a guess about who." "I have the same guess, Mr. Potter." Will you let me follow this through, Mr. Potter?" "Yes, I would not have it any other way." The boy nodded. The boy went home that night, and in the small office Dumbledore had given him on the 7th floor of the castle, a privilege extended quietly to him in 2nd year and not retracted, sat down at the desk and laid out, in green construct lines on a green construct table, all of the evidence the ring had accumulated. The evidence, the boy said, suggested the following. First, the new defense against the dark arts teacher, a retired Auror called Alistair Moody, was not, the ring confirmed by patient ambient scan, the actual Alistair Moody. The actual Alistair Moody was, the ring estimated, currently locked in a magical trunk in the imposter's office. The imposter was, the ring estimated with high confidence, a Death Eater. The imposter was, the ring estimated with somewhat lower confidence, the man Barty Crouch Jr., whom the ring had read about in the recent court records pertaining to Sirius's release. Second, the imposter had, on Halloween night, almost certainly placed Harry's name into the Goblet of Fire under a 4th school clause that the ring believed was a technical trick that the imposter had spent several months researching. Third, the imposter was acting on behalf of someone. The someone was, by the ring's reluctant assessment, the Wraith of Voldemort. The boy paused at this last point. "How?" he said. The ring took a moment. "Harry, the Wraith, the one we sent to Oa, is not the entirety of him. The Horcruxes have been the entirety of him, distributed. We have processed 2 of the Horcruxes already. There are 5 more. One of them, by my best read, is hiding. The hiding one is somewhere in Albania, by Dumbledore's notes, and is still capable of low-level command. The hiding one has, in the last month, been in communication with the imposter through a means I have not yet identified. The hiding one's plan, as best as I can reconstruct it, is to win the Triwizard tournament for you, by making sure you reach the final task. By making sure that at the final task you are alone and a portkey carries you to a particular location. By making sure that at that location a ritual will be performed. What ritual? A resurrection. To rebuild a body from his bones, his servant's flesh, and your blood. It is, Harry, it is the same ritual he attempted by way of Quirrell in your 1st year, although he had been planning at that point to use the stone. And what stops me from refusing to play? Nothing, Harry. Nothing stops you, the boy thought. But Cedric, he said. The ring took a moment. Yes, Harry. If you refuse, the goblet's terms of contract include a kind of magical penalty that I am, frankly, uncertain about. Probably nothing fatal. Possibly your magic stripped for a year. The goblet was not designed by careful jurists. The ring will protect you from the penalty if it comes, but I do not love depending on that. More importantly, if you refuse, Cedric will compete in 3 tasks that have been quietly modified to suit you. The dragons will be the same. The merfolk will be the same. The maze will be the same. Cedric will face them. Cedric will, by my estimate, complete the first 2 and reach the 3rd. Cedric will, at the 3rd, by the imposter's plan, end up in a graveyard. Cedric will, by the wraith's plan, no longer be necessary. The boy looked at the ring. The boy looked at the ring for a long moment. He'll kill Cedric, the boy said. He'll kill Cedric, Harry. If we don't go, he'll kill Cedric. The boy thought for 10 seconds. The boy said, then we go. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. He did not tell Cedric about the imposter. He did not tell Cedric in particular about the graveyard. He told Cedric instead, on the 2nd day after the selection, in a quiet corner of the library, that he had been informed by his own sources that this tournament had something significant at the end of it that the school did not yet know about, and that he and Cedric were going to be a team, the way they had been on the river. He told Cedric that he was going to give Cedric every piece of advice the ring could give him, and that he expected Cedric, in return, to extend the same generosity. Cedric, who had been ready to give the boy generosity anyway, agreed. The boy then told Fleur and Victor, in 2 separate conversations the next day, the same thing. Both, after some initial reserve, agreed. The boy had, by the end of the 2nd week of November, set up in the Hogwarts library after curfew, with Dumbledore's quiet approval, a small joint study session of all 4 Triwizard champions, in which the boy had given each of them, for free, every advantage the ring's preparation could offer. Fleur had at first regarded this with French suspicion. Victor had at first regarded this with Bulgarian suspicion. Cedric had at first regarded this with no suspicion at all, because Cedric had no suspicion in him. By the end of the 2nd week, all 3 older champions had concluded that the small, dark-haired English 4th year was, on balance, the most generous person they had ever met in a competitive context, and that they wanted, all 3 of them, to be his friend for the rest of their lives. This was not, on Harry's part, calculation. This was Harry being Harry. The ring made a quiet note that the boy's instinct for collaboration was, perhaps surprisingly, given his upbringing, the most reliably Lantern thing about him. The boy decided very early that he was going to give the audience their show. The boy had decided, having grown up in the absence of any kind of show, that he was going to give other people, when he could, the kind of moments he had spent his early childhood missing. The first task was the dragons. The boy walked into the arena to face a Hungarian horntail. He was wearing the Lantern uniform for the first time openly in the arena, in front of 10,000 wizards and a small audience of ministry officials, with the green sigil bright on his chest. He raised his right hand. He looked at the dragon. He said, in a clear voice the magical amplification carried to every seat in the arena, "Hello, my name is Harry Potter. I am today going to do this without harming you. I would prefer that you also did not harm me. If you can manage that, we can be done in about 90 seconds and we can both go home." The dragon, who had spent the last week being prodded by handlers in Romanian, was, for the first time in days, addressed politely. The dragon looked at the small, dark-haired boy. The dragon snorted a small puff of smoke that did not appear to be aimed at anyone. The boy raised his right hand. The boy built, in 3 layers, a containment cage around the dragon. The cage was, by his own preference, translucent rather than opaque, so the audience could see the dragon inside. The cage held one end of the arena. The boy walked calmly around the cage to the small clutch of eggs on the floor. He picked up the golden egg, which was the goal of the task. He held it aloft. The crowd, after a stunned silence of about 3 seconds, erupted. The boy then released the cage slowly, in 3 layers, in reverse order, said thank you to the dragon politely, and walked out of the arena. The dragon keepers in the back rooms were furious for about an hour, and then, on reflection, decided that the boy had probably been right. His score for the first task was a perfect 10 from every judge except Karkaroff, who gave him a 5 out of spite. Karkaroff was, by the second task, no longer the Durmstrang headmaster, having been quietly relieved of his duties by an emergency session of the Durmstrang Board of Trustees after a long anonymous letter, signed only with a small Green Lantern sigil, had reached them outlining certain disclosures about Karkaroff's past that the board found unacceptable. The boy had not sent the letter. Hermione had. The boy had not asked her to. Hermione had simply, after the first task, asked the ring for a small amount of information from its old archives, and had used it. The boy did not, in fact, find out about the letter until weeks later. When he did, he laughed for 10 minutes. The second task was the merfolk. The boy walked into the lake area at the appointed hour. He was wearing the lantern uniform. He raised his right hand. He built, in a single 1-second construct, a long, flexible green tube extending from the surface to a point 20 meters underwater. He then built, around himself, a green water helmet that maintained breathing-grade oxygen and equalized pressure, which he had spent 3 weeks designing, with the ring in the dormitory in his spare time. After careful interviews via the ring's translator with a representative of the merfolk who had agreed, the boy had not informed the judges of this, to a kind of pre-tournament protocol of mutual non-harm. The boy descended through his green tube. He found the hostages. He freed his, which was, by the rules, Ron. He found Cedric's hostage and gave Cedric a polite green wave to indicate where to go. He found Fleur's hostage. He found Victor's hostage. He brought them all up with him, on a small green platform he constructed for the purpose. Fleur, who had been delayed underwater by a Grindylow swarm, met him at the surface and threw her arms around him and kissed him on both cheeks and called him the kindest boy in 7 countries. And the boy turned, the ring noted, a remarkable shade of red. His score for the second task was, again, a perfect 10 from every judge, although the judges had this time, by a unanimous vote, replaced Karkaroff with the Durmstrang deputy head, who liked the boy and gave him a perfect 10 without making the boy ask. The third task was the maze. The maze, as the boy had been told by the ring, was the one. The maze contained, at the center, a portkey. The portkey, when touched, would translate whoever touched it to a small graveyard in Little Hangleton, which was the boyhood village of Tom Riddle, where Riddle's father and grandparents had been buried. In the graveyard, by the Wraith's plan, the imposter would be waiting in the form of a small servile man called Wormtail. No, wait, that was the rat in Azkaban. The imposter was Barty Crouch Jr. in his own form, and the Wraith itself, in the body of an infant homunculus, the ring had identified through scan and had not. The ring confided to the boy in a small, quiet voice, ever been able to look at directly without considerable shudders. In the graveyard there would be a ritual. The ritual called for the bone of the father, taken unwilling, which was already on hand, the flesh of the servant, given willingly, which Crouch was prepared to provide, and the blood of the enemy, taken by force, which was, in this case, the boy. The ritual would, if completed, restore Voldemort to a body. The plan, as agreed between the boy and Dumbledore and Sirius and the ring and the senior staff of the Auror office, was, let the ritual begin. Let it not finish. Let the boy, when the moment came, take Crouch out of the equation. Let the boy then process the Wraith. Let the boy not, by any means, allow Voldemort to be reborn. The plan had been refined for 2 months. The maze. The boy entered the maze at the start of the third task. Cedric entered, too, at the same time, by Harry's request and to the judge's surprise. Cedric had been told some, not all, but some, of what was waiting at the end. Cedric had been told, in particular, that if at any point Cedric had a choice between continuing to the cup and returning to the entrance, Cedric was to choose the entrance. Cedric had agreed. Inside the maze, the boy did not bother to navigate the maze. He rose, in a small, low-controlled flight, 2 meters above the hedge tops, with Cedric beside him on a small green platform of his construction. He flew them both to the center, where the Triwizard Cup sat on a small plinth, glowing in the dusk. Fleur and Victor, when the boy had checked half a maze ago on a small green scan, were both safe. Both had been knocked unconscious by the maze's hazards and were already in the hands of staff being escorted back to the entrance. The boy looked at the cup. The boy looked at Cedric. All right, the boy said. Listen, I am about to take the cup. The cup is going to translate me. When I have left, do not under any circumstance touch the cup. Do you understand? I understand, Harry. Cedric, I have been hoping I wouldn't have to ask you to do this. I want you to go back to the entrance. I want you to wait. I will return when I have done what I have come to do. If I am not back in 20 minutes, tell Dumbledore, tell him to send the team. He will know. Harry, yes, be safe. I will try. Promise me. I promise. Cedric, after a long moment, stepped back off the platform. Cedric stood on the maze floor, very small and very alone in the green torchlight, and looked at the boy on the platform. Cedric raised a hand. The boy reached out with his ungloved right hand, because the portkey would not register if his hand was inside a construct, and touched the cup. The world spun. The boy felt with the small private clarity of a lantern who had been training for years to be ready for moments exactly like this, the magic of the portkey take hold of him. He felt the lurch. He felt the cold. He felt the gravestones rising around him. He landed in a small, overgrown country churchyard. The light was dim. The moon was high. There was in the center of the churchyard a large stone tomb with a name carved on it. There was, beside the tomb, a small dark figure, Crouch, holding something the size of a baby. There was, in a stone basin on the ground, a low fluid that the boy did not want to look at directly. Crouch saw the boy. Crouch did not see Cedric because Cedric was not there. Crouch raised the wand he had been holding. Crouch said quickly, in the careful, unmusical voice the ring had recorded a great many times, "You, Potter, welcome to the place of your enemy's rebirth. I am not sorry that this is the last." The boy raised his right hand. The lantern uniform, which had been hidden under his triwizard robes all afternoon, blazed into visibility as the boy let the constructed cloak fall. The green sigil on his chest lit. The ring on his hand glowed. "Bartemius Crouch Jr.," the boy said calmly. "You are under arrest by the authority of the Green Lantern Corps for conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to assist in the resurrection of a Class VII undead being, impersonation of an Auror, illegal restraint of an Auror, and a substantial set of other charges I will detail to you in your custody hearing. You have the right to remain silent. You will be detained." Crouch raised his wand and screamed Avada Kedavra. The green killing curse, fast as light, hit the Green Lantern shield the boy had thrown up in front of himself approximately 110 milliseconds before Crouch had begun the incantation. The killing curse hit the shield. The shield held. The boy, with his other hand, extended a small green tendril, looped it around the wand, and gently took the wand out of Crouch's hand. The boy then built, around Crouch's body, the same containment cage he had built around Quirrell 3 years earlier, though more practiced, more efficient, the ring would later say, beautiful. Crouch was in less than 1 second contained. The boy turned to the basin. The basin contained, in a state of half-life that the boy did not entirely want to think about, a small homunculus that was the body of Voldemort. It was the size of an infant. It was pale, scaly, half-translucent. It had red eyes. It was by the ring's reed, the wraith, or rather, the local fragment of the wraith, the part that had been hiding in Albania for 13 years, bound to a constructed body that had been built from a series of dark rituals that the boy was not going to put into words. The boy walked slowly to the basin. He looked down at the homunculus. The homunculus looked up at the boy. For a moment, and this was, the boy would later say, the strangest moment of his life so far, the boy felt a kind of distant pity. He had not expected to feel pity. He felt it anyway. "Harry," whispered the homunculus. "Hello, Tom. Don't, Tom. I'm going to take you to Oa. You will rejoin the part of you we sent up there 4 years ago. You will have a hearing. You will not, by any reasonable mechanism, hurt anyone else in this world ever again. I am sorry, Tom. I am sorry your life took the shape it took. I am really sorry." The homunculus hissed. The hiss was, the boy thought, not entirely venom. The hiss was the kind of hiss a small thing made when the small thing was, for the first time in its life, being honestly addressed. The boy raised his right hand. The boy built, around the homunculus and the basin and the small dark fluid and the small bone fragment in a bag at the foot of the tomb, a single tight containment construct. The construct was, the boy noted with quiet satisfaction, the smallest one he had ever made for a target this important. The construct lifted off the ground. The construct hovered. The construct was ready. A small green portal opened beside the boy. Kilowog stepped through again with Tomari again, with this time a third lantern the boy had never met in the dreamscape, a woman with skin the color of red clay and a tight braid of hair that Kilowog introduced as Soranik Natu. "Poozer," said Kilowog. "Hello, you all right?" "I am." Kilowog looked at the contained homunculus. Kilowog looked at the contained Crouch. Kilowog looked at the gravestones. Kilowog looked at the boy. Kilowog said very softly, "You did right, Poozer, you did real right." The boy nodded. The boy did not this time cry. He had cried enough in 4 years. He stood in his uniform with the small green sigil bright on his chest in the country churchyard of Little Hangleton, and he watched 2 lanterns and a doctor take the wraith of Voldemort and Bartemius Crouch Jr. and the bone of the father and a small amount of cursed blood back through the green portal to Oa. He stayed in the churchyard for 1 more minute after the portal closed. He stood by the grave of Tom Riddle Sr. He read the name. He said quietly, "He was your son. He wasn't a good man. I am sorry. About the family you didn't get to be." He left the churchyard. He activated his return portkey, a small green construct prepared in advance and translated in the standard way back to the Triwizard Maze. Cedric was at the entrance of the maze. Cedric was, the boy saw, fine. Cedric had not touched anything he had been told not to touch. Cedric, on seeing the boy reappear, ran the last 6 steps and grabbed the boy in a hug that the boy returned for as long as Cedric needed it. The crowd cheered. The crowd did not at that moment know what had happened. The crowd would in time find out. For now, the crowd cheered. Dumbledore came down to the maze entrance. Dumbledore looked at the boy. Dumbledore did not need to be told. Dumbledore said, "Mr. Potter, Headmaster, are you whole?" "I am, Headmaster." "And Tom, off the board, Headmaster." Dumbledore put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Welcome back, Mr. Potter." "Thank you, Headmaster." The boy was awarded, by unanimous vote of the Triwizard judges, after a small panicked emergency meeting, the Joint Cup with Cedric Diggory, on the grounds that the small dark-haired English fourth year had not only completed the third task but had completed it, by the judges' careful inquiry over the following week, in a way that had, they did not yet know all the details, apparently neutralized an emerging threat of considerable severity. Cedric accepted the Joint Cup. The boy accepted the Joint Cup. Cedric, at the small ceremony, leaned over to the boy and whispered, "I owe you my life, I think." "Don't I?" "You don't owe me anything," said. "We're friends." "Yeah, but we're friends." "That's all?" Cedric, the boy thought, looked at him with an expression that nobody had ever looked at him with before. It was, the boy realized later, the expression of an older brother who has decided, in a single moment, that he was going to be an older brother for the rest of his life. The boy went home for the summer. He went again to Sirius's house. He spent August reading. He spent August writing letters. To Ron, to Hermione, to Cedric, to Ginny, to Fleur, whose post-tournament friendship with him had survived her return to France and who had begun in July, to apply for an apprenticeship in the British wizarding world that the boy had quietly written her a glowing reference for, to Victor, whose friendship with him had similarly survived a return to Bulgaria, and who had recently sent the boy an enormous wooden chest set as a thank-you gift, to Hagrid, to Lupin, to Dumbledore. He went twice to a small London restaurant with Sirius and ordered shepherd's pie. He grew, by the end of summer, another inch. He had, by his careful count, neutralized the Wraith of Voldemort from Quirrell, the Diary Horcrux, the Homunculus Horcrux from Albania with its share of the Wraith, and Bartemius Crouch Jr. He had 4 Horcruxes still to find. He had a long list in his small green notebook of Dumbledore's leads. He had also an uneasy feeling. The ring had it too. They had discussed it on the porch at Sirius's cottage on the last night of August. "He's not done," the boy said. "He is not done," the ring agreed. "There's something, the 4 Horcruxes, yes, and something else, a spare contingency, something we haven't found." "Almost certainly, Harry. He had 12 years to plan in Albania. He had a great many followers. We have, by my count, dealt with 2, Crouch and Pettigrew. There are others. There is, in particular, Bellatrix Lestrange." The ring took a moment. "Yes, Harry, Bellatrix Lestrange. She is in Azkaban. She has been for 14 years. She is, by my read, the most loyal of his followers and the most dangerous. If he wants a body and the homunculus is now off the board, Bellatrix is the most likely vessel. Bellatrix has, in fact, been waiting for him for 14 years. Will she escape? Almost certainly, Harry. He will arrange it. He will be without the homunculus, without Crouch, quite limited in his resources. But he will have his most fanatical follower and a small handful of others, and he will want Harry to come for you." The boy looked at the sea. "Then let him come," he said. "I'm tired of waiting." The ring did not, this time, immediately answer. The ring took, in fact, almost a full second to answer, which was, by the ring's own standards, a very long pause. "Harry," the ring said finally. "Yes. You are 14 years old. I am. You are the most accomplished lantern of your age in any universe I have ever heard of. That's nice. And you are about to face the last fight. I know. You ready?" The boy thought. "I don't know," he said honestly. I think I am as ready as I can be at 14. I think, going to be more ready if you are with me. I think, going to be very glad if Sirius is with me, and Ron and Hermione and Cedric and the headmaster and Hal. I think, going to need everyone I have. You have them, Harry. I know." A pause. Ring. "Yes, thank you for telling me. It is my job, Harry. It is more than your job." "Yes." A pause. The boy looked at the sea. The ring hummed quietly. "Ring," the boy said. "Yes, I love you. I love you, Harry." They sat on the porch a long time. The sea very gently came in. Diamond Suit, Diamond Suit, Diamond Suit. Chapter 7, The Sword of Hal Jordan. The escape from Azkaban happened on a Thursday in late October. There were 10 Death Eaters in the breakout. Bellatrix Lestrange was the first out. Rodolphus and Rabiston Lestrange were second and third. The Lestranges had been holding small private vigils in their cells for 14 years, in a kind of crackpottery devotion to the wraith of their master, and they came out of Azkaban into the gray October dawn with a kind of unbalanced joy that the Aurors who tried to recapture them on the cliffs of the prison island found. The boy was later told, particularly upsetting. Bellatrix's hair in the years of Azkaban had turned the color of frost, her face the color of paper, her hands the color of a hot stove. She had come out of Azkaban talking in a low whisper to a presence on her right shoulder, and the presence, the boy understood at once, hearing about it from Dumbledore that evening, was not nothing. The wraith had moved. What was left of him, after the boy and the Corps had taken 3 Horcruxes, was, by the ring's evaluation, about a fifth of Tom Riddle's original soul. The fifth was not enough to constitute a wraith in its own right. The fifth had been, for the last 4 years, attaching itself in a fractional way to anyone in the wizarding world who could be made to receive it. The fifth had taken, for 14 years, the form of a presence at Bellatrix Lestrange's shoulder. Bellatrix had spoken to him every night in her cell. Bellatrix had believed him to be a ghost. Bellatrix had been, in some technical sense, correct. Bellatrix, on her first night out of Azkaban, in a small abandoned manor in Yorkshire, knelt on the floor and offered her body. The fifth soul of Tom Riddle, who had been waiting, accepted. Bellatrix Lestrange stood up. Bellatrix Lestrange, who had been Bellatrix Lestrange, was, by approximately 3 in the morning on Friday, the 31st of October, no longer Bellatrix Lestrange. She was Bellatrix Voldemort, the last possession he would ever take. The boy was informed by the ring, which had been on a low-level passive scan, at 3:08 in the morning. The boy was in bed at Sirius's cottage, where he had been spending the long weekend with Sirius. Sirius, in the next bedroom, was, to the ring's reading, peacefully asleep. The boy sat up. He looked at his hand. He said, all right, Harry. How long? He will be ready in about 3 days, Harry. By Monday he will have arranged a public reveal. He will use it as a challenge. He will demand that you meet him. Where? By my best read, in a place we both have history. The graveyard. Number the graveyard is too small. I think, Harry, it will be at Hogwarts. He will go to the school. He will issue a public challenge. He will, by his read, want the audience. The boy nodded. All right, wake Sirius. He is, Harry. He's still a bit fragile. Wake him. The ring, with a small green tap on the bedroom wall, woke Sirius. Sirius came in. Sirius was, the boy could see, more steady than he had been a year ago. Sirius listened. Sirius nodded. Sirius said, all right, pup. All right, Sirius. What do you need? Everyone. You'll have them. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit by Friday afternoon, sooner than the boy had thought possible. Every adult Harry had ever loved had been told. Sirius. Lupin. The Weasleys, by family meeting at the Burrow, where Mrs. Weasley had cried briefly, and then said with steel in her voice that of course Harry could count on every one of them. The Grangers in their small Hampstead house who had said, bring her home safe, and the boy had said, I will, and had hugged them both. Dumbledore, McGonagall. Madame Bones at the Ministry, who had agreed to deploy 24 Aurors at the school as a defensive screen, although the boy had quietly told her that the screen would, in his estimation, not be necessary in the strict sense. It would only be necessary in the sense of giving the Aurors something to feel useful about. Fleur, who had apparated in from France on the Saturday morning with her wand already in her hand, and a look on her face that suggested that whoever was threatening her small English brother was about to discover a new dimension of regret. Victor, who had portkeyed in from Bulgaria with 2 cousins who were both qualified curse-breakers. Cedric Diggory, who had not been allowed by his parents to fight personally, but who had not been kept from coming up to the school with his father on the Saturday afternoon to stand in the staff room and look the boy in the eye and say, Harry, I'll be here. Whatever happens, I'll be here. And the boy had nodded and had not at that moment trusted himself with words. And Hal Jordan in the dreamscape on the Saturday night before the showdown, sitting on a small green stool on the salt flats of Dream, Nevada, with his coffee in hand and his uniform pressed, and the boy across from him. Harry, Hal, how are you feeling? Scared? Good, you should be scared. Anybody who isn't scared on the night before a fight like this isn't telling you the truth. Are you scared? Hal, the recording, the memory, the projection of a man who had been dead for 9 years by every reckoning the boy was capable of, smiled. Harry, I'm a recording. I don't get scared anymore. But the man who recorded me, the man who made the ring, he would be scared. Yeah, he'd be scared. He'd be scared because he loved you, and he would have given anything for you not to have to do this. He's scared, the recording's calm. The man's scared. The boy looked at the salt flat. Hal, yes, what did your father say to you on the day you turned 6? He said you're not afraid, son. I know you're not. Did he know? He thought he knew. He hoped he knew. He said it to give me something to grow into. Did it work? Eventually, yeah, it worked. The boy nodded. Hal, yes, kid, you're not afraid. I know you're not. I know because I've been watching the recording. The recording, the man was not afraid, not when it mattered, not when he was building me a ring, not when he was sending it across a universe. You were the bravest person who's ever lived in any universe that I've ever heard of. And I'm not as brave as you, but I am going to try. Hal Jordan, the recording, the memory, looked at the boy across the small green stool. Hal Jordan, the recording, did not, for a long moment, speak. Hal Jordan, the recording, set his coffee down and walked slowly around the stool and stood beside the boy and put his hand on the boy's shoulder and said very quietly, in a voice the recording had practiced for 9 years to be ready to say, Harry James Potter of Sector 2814. I am so proud of you. I cannot even. He could not finish. The boy stood up. The boy hugged Hal Jordan. Hal Jordan, the recording, hugged him back. Hug lasted, by the ring's careful timing, 3 minutes and 11 seconds, which was, by the ring's careful internal documentation, the longest single embrace any lantern had ever exchanged with a memory of another lantern in the history of the Corps. The boy stepped back. Hal, yes, will you teach me one more thing before tomorrow? Anything, kid, anything. Teach me the sword. Hal Jordan looked at him for a long moment. Are you sure? I'm sure. All right, come here. Diamond suit, the sword, the ring had told the boy at age 10, was the morally most complicated of the basic lantern constructs. The sword was, by own tradition, the construct a lantern made only when there was no other construct that would do the job. The sword was the symbol of last resort. The sword had been in Hal Jordan's career made twice, once against the avatar of the Anti-Monitor at the very end of his life, in the form of an aircraft, which was, by Hal's own private classification, a kind of sword, and once, 20 years earlier, against a being called Krona, whose evil had been of the kind that admitted no other response. Hal had not, in his lifetime, made the sword often. Hal had not, in his lifetime, ever taught the sword to anyone. Hal Jordan, the recording, taught the boy the sword on the salt flats of Dream, Nevada in approximately 11 hours of dream time, which the boy experienced as 11 hours, but which the ring registered as a single hour and 40 minutes of physical sleep. The sword was a long curved blade of green light. The sword had, Hal explained, a flame along its edge, not because the flame was necessary, but because the flame was a warning, a kind of refusal to hide, the way a small fire was held aloft by a sailor in a harbor at night. The sword was, Hal explained, not just an edge. The sword was a statement. The sword said, I will use this. The sword said, I have decided. The sword said, I am sorry. The boy learned to make the sword. He learned to swing it without bias, with both hands, with one hand, with either hand. He learned to hold it lit and to hold it dark. He learned, finally, to release it in a clean, smooth motion the ring called the relinquish, in which the sword unmade itself instantly when the boy decided the sword was no longer needed. Hal, at the end of the lesson, in the green-orange dusk of the dream salt flat, looked at the boy holding the sword in his right hand and said, Harry, yes. Don't make this lightly, don't make this for show, don't make this for anger, make it only when you've decided you have to. I will, promise me, I promise. And then when you've decided, don't hesitate. I won't. Hal nodded. He looked at the boy for a long moment. He said, You'll do all right, Harry. The boy nodded. He woke up. It was Sunday morning. The day was clear. It was time. Diamond suit, the challenge came at noon. The wraith in Bellatrix's body did not appear at Hogwarts. The wraith in Bellatrix's body appeared instead on the rooftop of the Ministry of Magic in central London, with a wand in her hand, and proceeded to inform the world, through a small magical broadcast that hijacked every wireless transmitter the wizarding world had, that Bellatrix Lestrange was once again at liberty, that Bellatrix Lestrange was now host to the body of the Dark Lord, that the Dark Lord wished to issue a duel challenge to the boy Harry Potter at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. On the steps of Hogwarts Castle, with the world's wizards watching, and that any failure of the boy to appear would be taken as a forfeit, and the wraith would proceed, in subsequent weeks, to demonstrate his displeasure at increasing range and scale. The boy heard the announcement on the radio in Sirius's kitchen at 12:06. The boy nodded once. All right, he said. He put on his uniform. He hugged Sirius. He hugged Lupin, who had come up from the village to be there. He apparated by the ring's mechanism to the front gates of Hogwarts at 12:30. The grounds were already full of people. By 2:30, the grounds were full of every adult wizard who had ever cared about Harry Potter, plus a substantial fraction of the Auror force, plus a quiet 100 journalists, plus a quieter contingent of senior staff from the ministry, plus, to the boys' quiet amusement, a small green portal at the corner of the lawn from which 3 lanterns had stepped. Kilowog in person, Tamari in person, and Sornik Natu in person, all of whom had come. The boy understood not to fight, but to watch, the way a senior lantern came to watch a junior's certifying exam. They had not come to interfere. They had come because Harry James Potter of Sector 2814 was about to do something they wanted to bear witness to, in their own bodies, and the small interuniversal authority that they had had to ask permission of had, in a unanimous own vote at the equivalent of 2 in the morning their time, said yes. Dumbledore stood at the top of the steps in his deep blue robes. Dumbledore, the boy noted, looked older than he had at the last Triwizard, and looked also younger. Looked, in fact, the way the boy had heard old soldiers looked at the moment they were finally able to put a long old burden down. McGonagall stood beside him in her tartan. Severus Snape stood on the other side of him in his black, and Snape, the boy thought, was looking at the boy with something that was not, today, contempt, and which the boy could not at that moment exactly name. Snape stepped forward as the boy approached the foot of the steps. "Mr. Potter, Professor." Snape paused. Snape, who had over 4 years of careful private observation, come to a number of conclusions about the boy that he had not, until this moment, ever permitted himself to speak aloud, did the thing he had not, until this moment, ever done. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Potter, for several years of behavior that did you no credit and me less. I will after this deliver it properly. Today I wished only to say your mother would be very proud of you. Go and finish this." The boy looked at Severus Snape for a long moment. The boy nodded. "Thank you, Professor." He climbed the steps. He stood at the top beside Dumbledore. He looked out at the lawn. At the bottom of the lawn by the gates, a small dark figure was approaching, a thin woman in black with frost-white hair and a smile that was not entirely her own. Bellatrix Lestrange. Bellatrix Voldemort. The figure walked slowly up the grass, in the way of a person who has been waiting for this moment for 15 years and intends to enjoy every step of it. The boy waited. At the front of the lawn, Bellatrix Voldemort stopped. She raised her wand. She looked up the slope. She saw the boy. Her smile became, the boy noted, very small and very fixed. "Harry," said the Wraith in Bellatrix's mouth, in the voice that was a careful blend of Bellatrix's high mocking laugh and Voldemort's low cold whisper. "Harry Potter, come down." "I'll come down," the boy said in his clear unamplified voice that the ring carried very politely to every ear on the lawn. "But you'll come up. Halfway, meet me at the fountain. I don't want to fight on the grass. There are children at the windows." The Wraith, in Bellatrix's mouth, laughed. The laugh was a real laugh, the Wraith was, the boy noted, with the small clinical surprise of a lantern observing a target, actually amused. "Very well, Harry, the fountain." They met at the fountain. The fountain was a small old stone basin in the middle of the lawn, with a carved phoenix at its center, which Dumbledore had, the boy knew from Hagrid, donated to the school in 1947. The water in the basin reflected the sky. The figures around the lawn, students, staff, lanterns, Aurors, family, were perfectly still. Bellatrix Voldemort stopped on her side of the fountain. The boy stopped on his. "Harry," said the Wraith, "you have over a number of years now been a thorn in my side. Yes, you have done, I will admit, a great deal of damage to my enterprise. Yes, you have also been, by my count, assisted by a great deal of magic that does not technically belong to this world. That's accurate. You will not today have any assistance." The boy looked at the Wraith. The boy very slowly smiled. "Tom," he said, "I have assistance. Behind me on the steps is everyone I love. On the grass, between us, is the entire student body of this school. In a small dreamscape on the inside of my head is a man called Hal Jordan, who has been a father to me in every way the universe has in 15 years permitted. In my ring is the will of every lantern who ever lived. I am Tom in this fight, the least alone person you have ever seen. The fight will not be fair. The fight has not been fair since I was 6. Then, wand at your side, final warning. You are entitled even now to be detained rather than killed, if you set the wand down. If you let Bellatrix Lestrange go, if you allow the fragment of yourself in her to be drawn out, the way the others were, you will be taken to Oa, you will be processed, you will, in some form, continue. If you choose to fight, I will fight, you will not survive it, decide. Bellatrix Voldemort, the Wraith, and the woman both looked at the boy across the fountain. The Wraith said, and it was, for the first time the boy had heard it, an honest voice, "I cannot, Harry, I am too far. I am by my own decision this thing now, and I do not have any other shape to become." The boy nodded slowly. He had expected this answer. He had, in some sense, hoped for it. He had not, by any internal measure, wanted to be the kind of lantern who killed. He had also, for 15 years, known that he was going to have to be. "All right," said the boy. "Then let's finish." The wraith raised the wand. The wraith said the killing curse. The boy raised his right hand. The boy made the sword. The sword burst into being in his hand, the curved green flame blade, hand and a half hilt, glowing edge brighter at the cutting line with a small green flame along the spine. The boy was holding it in his right hand, with his left hand at his hip in the small balancing position Hal had taught him on the salt flats. The boy was on this day 14 years old and 5 feet 5 inches tall, and his hands were, the ring noted, with quiet observation, perfectly steady. The killing curse hit the sword. The killing curse, which had killed thousands of beings across the wizarding world over the centuries, which had been the wraith's signature attack since he was 17, did not, as it had not for the boy at any point in the last 15 years, kill the boy. The killing curse hit the sword and was, by the sword, neither blocked nor reflected. The killing curse was absorbed. The flame on the sword's edge brightened. The boy stepped forward around the fountain, the sword raised. The wraith in Bellatrix's mouth said the next curse. The boy turned the sword. The next curse hit the sword. The flame brightened. The boy took another step. The wraith, for the first time in this body, took a step back. The boy said quietly, "Tom, I am sorry. About your mother, about your father, about the choices you made when you were 16 and 20 and 40. I am sorry I am the one who has to be the answer. I would have, if there had been any other way, taken any other way. There is, Tom, no other way." He swung the sword. The wraith in Bellatrix's mouth did not block. The wraith could not, by any of its arts, block the sword. The sword passed through the wraith, and not through Bellatrix. The sword, by the precise targeting the ring had been building since the moment the wraith had spoken, separated the wraith from the woman. The wraith, severed, hung in the air for a fraction of a second in a small dark mist. Bellatrix Lestrange, for the first time in 14 years and 7 months, was alone in her body. She collapsed slowly on the grass. The boy did not turn his attention from the wraith. He raised his left hand. He built, around the dark mist, a containment cage. The cage was, by the ring's reed, the cleanest cage the boy had ever made. The cage was small. The cage was complete. The wraith hung in it, unable to speak, unable to move. The boy looked at the wraith. "Tom, I am sorry." He closed his hand. The cage tightened by a millimeter at a time, by Hal's careful instruction, the way a lantern ends a being without violence, and the wraith of Tom Riddle, the last fifth soul of a man who had once been a boy in an orphanage in London, faded slowly in a small dark dispersing mist, until there was nothing left of him on the grass of the Hogwarts lawn but a small whisper of cold air and a long overdue silence. The boy, after a long moment, released the cage. He looked down at Bellatrix Lestrange. Bellatrix Lestrange was alive. Bellatrix Lestrange was crying on the grass with her hands over her face. The boy knelt down. He looked at her. He spoke quietly. "Bellatrix, he's gone. He's not coming back. He is gone for good. You're going to be all right. You are going to go to St. Mungo's. You are going to have help. You are not going to be punished by me for what he did with your body. I am sorry. I am sorry for what he did to you. He did it to you for 40 years, and you were a child once. I am sorry." Bellatrix Lestrange, who had not in 15 years heard a kind word from anyone, looked up at the boy. He said you would. I know what he said. He said you would kill me. He said many things. You are. I'm sorry," the boy said again. "I'm so sorry." He helped her stand. He walked her very slowly across the lawn to where 2 healers from St. Mungo's were waiting. They took her gently away. She would, the boy understood from later conversations with the healers, never be quite all right. She had been damaged in a way no one could entirely repair, but she would not, after that afternoon, hurt anyone else. She would, in time, ask for and receive an audience with the boy. They would speak, the boy and Bellatrix Black, for the first of many small, careful conversations in St. Mungo's 6 months later. She would, in time, write a memoir. The boy would, on the day the memoir was published, send her flowers, but that was all later. For now, in the small autumn afternoon, on the lawn of Hogwarts Castle, the boy stood by the fountain with the sword still in his right hand. He looked slowly at the sword. He looked at the small green flame along the edge. He let the sword unmake itself. The sword, with the small, clean smoothness Hal had taught him, faded out of his hand. It did not, by any tradition the boy was aware of, leave anything behind. It did not, by the strict letter of the Lantern Code, need to be celebrated. The boy stood for a moment with his empty hand in front of him. Then, and only then, he raised the hand and looked at the small green ring on his middle finger. The ring was warm. The ring was, in fact, warmer than the boy had ever felt it. He spoke quietly in the soft voice that he used for important questions. "Ring." The ring spoke. It spoke, this time, in a voice the boy had heard before only in dreams. The warm, low American voice with the trace of an Air Force accent, the voice of Hal Jordan as the recording had let it be. It spoke for everyone on the lawn to hear, although the boy did not, by any choice he could remember making, decide to amplify it. "Sector 2814 secure," said the ring. "You have my pride, Harry. Hal Jordan would be honored." The boy looked at the ring. The boy very quietly said the thing he had been waiting to say for 15 years. "I'd like to meet him someday, in the stars." The ring took, for a moment, a long, warm pause. "You will," it said. The Hogwarts staff had, in the years after, a tradition. The tradition was simple. On the autumn afternoon each year that coincided, by the school's calendar, with the anniversary of the duel on the lawn, the staff would gather, quietly, without ceremony, with a single bottle of Ogden's Old Fire whiskey in 7 glasses, in the small upper sitting room of the headmaster's office, and they would drink 1 careful glass each, and they would not say anything in particular. The first year of the tradition, in the autumn after the boys' 4th year, the staff had not known they were starting a tradition. They had only known that they had needed an hour together to acknowledge what had happened. The 2nd year, by quiet agreement, they had repeated the gathering. By the 5th year, it was a fixed point on the staff calendar. By the 20th year, it was something the staff did even after the boy was no longer at the school, even after Dumbledore had died, even after McGonagall had retired. The bottle was always Ogden's. The glasses were always the 7 that Dumbledore had set out on the first occasion. The conversation was always quiet. The boy did not ever attend the gathering. He had been invited once by McGonagall in his 20th year. He had, after careful thought and a long conversation with the ring, declined. He had explained in a small handwritten letter that the gathering was not, he thought, for him. It was for them. It was for the people who had stood on the steps that afternoon and had not been able, by the structure of the moment, to lift a hand to help. It was for the people who had been, in their own way, also afraid. They had, the boy wrote in the letter, been more frightened that afternoon than he had been, because they had been watching him do it. He could only be afraid for himself. They had been afraid for him on top of being afraid for themselves. It was, he thought, a larger fear, and they had earned the right to drink to its passing without him hovering in the room. He had signed the letter, with love and with apologies and with thanks, and McGonagall had read it in the staff room and had set it down on the table, and had said in a voice that was not, at that particular moment, the voice of the deputy headmistress, "Quite right, the brat, quite right." The headmistress's portrait of Dumbledore, who had, by the 20th year, been dead for several years, and was now hanging in a small gold frame on the wall, chuckled. "Lily's boy," Dumbledore said. "Lily's boy," McGonagall agreed. They drank. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. Cedric Diggory became in time the boy's best friend along with Ron and Hermione. He went to work as a cursebreaker for Gringotts after Hogwarts. He married eventually a quiet Beauxbatons researcher named Lysette Vauquelin whom he met on a dig in Bordeaux. He named his first son Harry. He named his second son Hal. He was a generous man and a kind father, and his children grew up calling the boy Uncle Harry without anyone having to explain why. Ron played professional Quidditch for the Chudley Cannons for 2 seasons before deciding, over a long Christmas conversation with the boy and Hermione, that the life of a professional Quidditch player did not, in the end, suit him. He took a job at the Ministry, in the Department of Magical Games and Sports, where he eventually rose to head of the office. He married Lavender Brown in his 24th year, which had surprised no one except possibly Lavender. He had 4 children. He learned to bake. He was, by every account from his friends, the happiest of all of them, which was a thing he himself denied vigorously, and was nevertheless obviously true. Hermione, after Hogwarts, took her postdoctoral seminar at Oa University, the one the ring had said she could have if she wanted. She did not stay on Oa. She came back to Britain with her seminar credentials and built, over the next 15 years, a small interdisciplinary discipline called Magic Studies, which by the time she was 40 had its own department at the University of Edinburgh and its own journal. She married a Muggle journalist she met at a book launch named Daniel Cohen. She had 2 children. She was, in time, awarded an Order of Merlin, first class, for her work on the integration of Magic into the standard wizarding curriculum. She did not, on accepting it, give a speech. She gave a single sentence: "I owe this to a small green ring and the boy who wore it." She did not name him. She did not need to. Ginny Weasley, who had been the small first year carrying the diary in her bag, and who had in the years since become a Hogwarts Quidditch captain and a Holyhead Harpies forward and a sports writer for the Daily Prophet, married the boy in the small spring ceremony at the Burrow when he was 26 and she was 25. They had 3 children. The eldest, named James Sirius, became, to his own polite surprise, a lantern at the age of 23, the night before his graduation from his own small wizarding college in Edinburgh, when a small green ring that was, by every measure the boy could apply, the boy's own second-generation construct, having been refined for 18 years in the back of his head, appeared on his finger and said, "James Sirius Potter of Sector 2814, you have the ability to overcome great fear. Welcome to the Green Lantern Corps." The boy, on hearing the news, had, through the ring in the dreamscape, laughed for about 10 minutes. The boy then sat down with his son at the kitchen table and walked him through the basic curriculum, in the way the boy had once been walked through by Hal Jordan on the Salt Flats. The middle child, Hal Potter, did not become a lantern. Hal Potter became instead a healer. He worked at St. Mungo S for 40 years. He was in every report from every patient, the most patient man on the staff. The youngest, Lily Luna, became, of all things, a writer. She wrote children's books. She wrote, among others, a series of small stories for very small children about a boy in a cupboard who was visited by a green ring, although her stories were sweeter than the truth and ended sooner. Her father did not mind. Her father had read every one of them aloud to her, and then to her children, and then, once in his late 70s, when no one was watching, to his own dreamscape Hal Jordan, who had laughed in the way Hal laughed. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. The boy's relationship with his Dursleys did not, in the end, ever fully heal. He did not, in his lifetime, see Uncle Vernon again after the morning he had left Privet Drive. Uncle Vernon died at 63 of a heart attack. The boy did not attend the funeral. The boy did, on hearing of the death, send Aunt Petunia a small bouquet of white flowers with a card that said only, "I am sorry for your loss, Harry." Aunt Petunia did not write back. Aunt Petunia herself, at age 68, wrote to the boy unprompted for the first time in his life. The letter was short. The letter said, "Harry, Vernon is dead. Dudley is grown. I am alone in this house, and I have been thinking, and I would like to apologize to you. Not all at once. I am not capable of apologizing all at once, and even if I were, you would not, I think, accept it, because the apology is not large enough for what I did. But I would like to apologize a small amount today by writing this letter. I am sorry I left you in the cupboard. I am sorry I did not love your mother enough when she was alive. I am sorry for many other things I cannot put down on a single page. If you would consent in any form to see me, not for a long visit, just a short one, I would be very grateful. Petunia." The boy, who was 41 when he received the letter, read it 3 times. He set it down on the kitchen table. He looked at Ginny, who had read it over his shoulder. He looked at the ring on his hand. "Ring," he said. "Yes, Harry. What do you think?" The ring took a long moment. "Harry, the letter is honest. The letter is, in fact, by my read, the most honest sentence-by-sentence document she has ever produced in her life. The letter does not, by any meaningful measure, undo what she did. The letter only proposes that she would like, with whatever time she has left, to try. Should I go? That, Harry, is yours." The boy thought. "I will go," he said. "Not for her. I would like, before I am old, to have not been a person who refused. I would like to be the kind of person Hal Jordan would have been if his aunt had written him a letter. Hal would have gone. Hal would have gone." He went. He went on a Sunday afternoon, by apparition, by himself, with his wedding ring on his left hand and the lantern ring on his right, and a small wrapped gift in his coat. A book Aunt Petunia had wanted as a girl, which the boy had found at a great deal of effort in the back of a London bookshop the previous Saturday, and he sat at the kitchen table at number 4 Privet Drive across from Aunt Petunia, who had aged in a way the boy had not expected, and they did not, by any account, either of them ever gave anyone talk about the cupboard. They talked instead about Lily. Aunt Petunia, the boy learned for the first time, had had in childhood a small notebook she had kept of stories Lily had told her, and she had kept it for 60 years, and she opened it at the table that afternoon and read 3 of the stories aloud, and the boy listened, and the boy, very softly, cried. He went after that once a month for the rest of Aunt Petunia's life. They did not, in any of those visits, address the cupboard. They did not need to. The cupboard was, by the time of Aunt Petunia's death 5 years later, a thing the two of them did not need to discuss. The cupboard was, by then, a thing they had walked past together too many times for it to have any more power. Aunt Petunia, on her deathbed, took the boy's right hand in both of hers and looked at the ring on his middle finger and said, Lily would be so proud. I know, Aunt Petunia. I am proud, I know." She died in her sleep about 3 hours later, with the boy at her bedside and Ginny holding the boy's other hand and the small green ring on the boy's middle finger very quietly humming. The boy did this time attend the funeral. He gave the eulogy. He kept it short. He said only this: "She was my mother's sister. She did her best in the end. She did her best. That is sometimes all a person can do, and sometimes it is not enough, and sometimes it is enough, and sometimes it is both. Today I think it is both. Thank you for coming." Dudley, who had grown into a not very bright but not unkind man with a wife and 2 children, hugged the boy at the door of the funeral hall and said very quietly into the boy's ear, "Thanks, Harry, for coming, for everything." The boy, who had not, since the morning he had left Privet Drive, hugged Dudley, returned the hug briefly with great formality. He nodded. He left. He did not, in the years after, see Dudley again often. He did, on the birth of Dudley's first grandchild, send a small gift. Dudley sent a thank you note. They did not, for the rest of their lives, communicate further. It was, the boy thought, on the train home from the funeral that evening, with Ginny asleep on his shoulder, enough. It was, in fact, perhaps everything. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. The boy lived to be 94. He died peacefully in his sleep in the small house in Hogsmeade in his 94th year, after a long, quiet decade of being a grandfather and a great-grandfather. He had, by his careful count, which was off by approximately 23 great-grandchildren. He had a lantern's commendation hung over his fireplace, and a small green ring on the middle finger of his right hand, and an old photograph of Hal Jordan, which the ring had reconstructed for him in his 40s from its own memory archive, on the mantelpiece next to a photograph of James and Lily Potter at their wedding, and another of Sirius Black at his 40th birthday party. Sirius had lived to be 86. And another of Albus Dumbledore at the boy's wedding. Dumbledore had been the officiant, and another of Ron and Hermione and the boy together at the boy's 60th birthday party, all 3 of them laughing at something Ron had just said, and that nobody, after the fact, was ever quite able to remember. He died with Ginny in the chair beside the bed, holding his right hand. He did not, before death, say anything in particular. He did not need to. The ring on his finger and the small, quiet voice of Hal Jordan that he had known for 88 years said, "Sector 2814 secure, Harry, always." The boy smiled, very small. He nodded, very small. He did not, after that, open his eyes again. The ring, after a long moment, very quietly slipped off his finger. The ring rose by its own decision in a small green flash that Ginny would later describe as the kindest light she had ever seen, through the ceiling of the bedroom, through the roof of the house, through the sky over Hogsmeade, through the dark above the atmosphere, and out into the long, quiet road between universes that it had not traveled in 88 years. It traveled the road. It arrived, 3 days later by its own clock, in the upper chamber of the central power battery on the planet Oa. The candle, which the battery had been keeping lit for the boy for 88 years, was very gently, very quietly, very tenderly extinguished. The lanterns gathered in the chamber, every lantern alive at that moment, every lantern who could reach Oa on 3 days' notice, several thousand in total, stood at attention. They saluted. They were silent for 1 full minute. Then Kilowog, who was no longer young, Kilowog, in fact, had become, in the intervening decades, the senior lantern in charge of training. Kilowog had been telling the new Poozers stories about Harry Potter for 40 years, stepped forward and raised his enormous green fist, and said in his happy avalanche voice that had become, over the years, somewhat softer, "Sector 2814 secure. Poozer's home." The lanterns clapped. They clapped for a long time. Somewhere in the small private place where the battery kept its own memories, in the warm green hum that had been running for 9 billion years, there was a flicker that was not, by any reasonable measure, a sound. It was instead the kind of small private sigh that very old beings give when a long-running concern is, finally, allowed to be at rest. The battery had, by its own quiet calculation, kept the boy alive for 88 years. The battery had, by its own quiet preference, loved him for the entire 88. The battery did not, by its own discipline, normally permit itself to love any single being, on the grounds that the Guardians had long ago set procedure to prevent it. The battery had broken the procedure in this one case on its own quiet authority. The battery did not, for the record, regret it. The ring, the small green ring of Sector 2814, was after the ceremony set in a small private place inside the battery where it could rest. The ring would, eventually, in some future hour the battery had not yet decided on, be given out again. The ring would, when that hour came, find a new lantern. The ring would carry in its lattice every memory of Hal Jordan and every memory of Harry Potter. The ring would, in its long career in this universe or another, do good. For now the ring slept. The boy slept. The battery hummed. The candle was, in the small ceremony of its extinction, finally allowed to be a memory. And somewhere in the dreamscape that did not, technically, exist anymore without the boy to dream it, Hal Jordan, the recording, the memory, the projection of a man who had once been a test pilot in California, walked out onto a small green salt flat at dusk and looked up at the orange sky and waited. The boy walked up beside him. "Hal, Harry, did I do all right?" "You did, kid, you did real all right. I'd like to go for a flight. I was hoping you'd say so." They flew. The salt flat receded below them. The orange sky brightened, 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 until it was the green of the inside of a battery, until it was the green of the inside of a ring, until it was the green of a small boy's eyes in the dim light of a cupboard a long time ago. They flew, the two of them, until the salt flat was no longer visible. They flew, the two of them, until there was nothing under them but the long, warm hum of the will of the universe. They flew, the two of them, until they had, finally, gone home. In the stars, the end. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. The afterward was long, and quiet, and good. The wizarding world celebrated. The wizarding world did not, however, get a parade out of Harry Potter, who declined every public ceremony offered him on the grounds that he had not, in his estimation, finished any private growing up yet. The wizarding world wrote books about him. The wizarding world named buildings after him. The wizarding world, in a small embarrassing event in Diagon Alley, attempted to put a statue of him at the foot of the alley, which the boy quietly had reconfigured with a small green construct, overnight, when no one was looking, to be a statue of Hal Jordan instead, holding a small green coffee mug at chest height, which the wizarding world found puzzling but kept anyway, because the boy had asked. He finished Hogwarts. He took his owls in his 5th year. He took his newts in his 7th. He passed both sets in the upper percentile of every subject he had taken. He played for Gryffindor in his 6th and 7th years, after Dumbledore quietly persuaded him that he had earned a year or two of nonsense. He won, with Gryffindor, 2 Quidditch Cups and was named the Daily Prophet Player of the Year in his 7th year, which honor he accepted on stage with a small embarrassed grin and dedicated, in his short acceptance speech, to a friend in another universe who, he said, had taught him to fly. He took up, after Hogwarts, a small house outside Hogsmeade, with Sirius and Lupin and Dobby, and visited Ron at the Burrow most weekends. He went to a small wizarding college in Edinburgh, where he studied, to the surprise of many, astrophysics with a minor in interdimensional jurisprudence. He paid for the tuition out of his own family vault, although he gave Sirius the choice to pay, which Sirius declined on the grounds that he was, in his own words, only ever going to spend the money on you anyway, pup. He married Ginny Weasley 12 years later in a small ceremony at the Burrow. He was a good husband. He was a better father to 3 children whose names, James, Hal, and Lily, were chosen, with Ginny's full agreement, in honor of his 3 parents. He kept the ring on the middle finger of his right hand for the rest of his long life. He never, in all his life, took it off. He found, with Dumbledore's help, the last 4 Horcruxes over a careful 5-year period from his 16th to his 21st year, and the world was, by the end of that period, free of the last fragment of Tom Riddle. The fragments were taken to Oa and processed. The first time Harry James Potter visited Oa in his own body, not in the dreamscape, he was 23 years old. The Guardians of the Universe had, by special vote at an unprecedented interuniversal session, extended an invitation to him, with the ring as carrier. He went. He was met at the city gate by Kilowog and Tomari and Sornik Natu and Arisia, who had, in the years since they had been recordings to him, become, by gentle correspondence through the ring, friends in their own right. He was taken to the central power battery. He stood at the foot of the column of green light. He looked up. He looked for a long moment at the small distant shape near the upper chamber of the column, where, if you were squinting, you could see, if your eyes were lantern eyes, which his were, a small green figure standing on a small green platform looking down. The figure raised a hand. The boy, who was now a man, raised his back. Hal Jordan in the battery did not need to speak. The boy did not need to be spoken to. They stood like that for almost a minute in the green light in the city of green domes and white towers, in a universe that was not their own and which they had between them built a quiet bridge to. The ring on the boy's hand very quietly hummed. "I told you," it said. "You did," said the boy. "Welcome home, Lantern." The boy stood there for a long time, looking up at the column. He had, by his careful count, which the ring corrected only by the smallest of margins, finally, in a long career of finishing many things, finished one in particular. He had, at last, come to meet his father. In the stars, the end.